Yo, yo, yo.
Hello,
What's up,
hello.
everybody? We are back. Welcome, everybody, to Actuali Podcast. I'm Chris,
I'm DJ.
and today we're going to be covering episode 13 of John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis series. We just covered two episodes dedicated to higher states of consciousness, which were amazing, and we highly recommend this episode to anybody that finds any of this intriguing. It's from an immense 50-lecture series by Professor John Vervaeke, a professor out of University of Toronto. Cog-Sci, psychology, and Buddhist studies, and much more in his background. So, last episode, I'm going to help us catch up here for just a moment. I'm going to get us set up.
Oh boy.
Make sure
Oh, I
Facebook is live.
have the notes right here. Let's just
Radio.
that's so many notes.
The pervasive sense of oneness that is indicative of higher states of consciousness. So we're talking about these,
There it is.
what people often term them enlightenment experiences.
Yeah, I'm creating a descriptive and prescriptive explanation of what's going on, and by descriptive, describing it, and then why, and then prescriptive is why to do it.
Yes.
Why participate in these altered states? Why?
Yes. To legitimate, why should science become interested?
Yeah.
We now have reputable proof in many peer-reviewed studies now of these higher states of consciousness. We're measuring the brain waves of Buddhist practitioners in transcendent states, where we're seeing the brain under the influence of various psychedelic substances, plant medicines. And we are also noticing psychological differences in people after they have these experiences that are positive,
Yep.
deeply, deeply positive for them,
Yep.
and life-changing.
So we discussed the Solomon effect, which was, if somebody's having a problem, say like interpersonally with somebody else, and they explain it to you, they are explaining it from their first person egoic perspective, and what you have them do is you have them then explain the situation from how a third person would see it. And I think this is important to keep in mind when we're discussing, say, like higher states of consciousness, because it is very much becoming the third person's perspective with you and and your relationship to the universe. So
Yes,
that
yes.
third extra thing.
An allocentric perspective rather than an egocentric
Yes,
perspective.
yes,
So instead
yes.
of feeling a sense of divisive, being divided from the environment, thinking of ourselves as separate from the world and other people, we feel an intrinsic sense of oneness and interconnection that is experiential. It's beyond intellectualization. Like we can know that we're trading atoms at all times, and that this whole universe really is this one thing with very many different constituents to it, but it's still this one thing. We can know all of this intellectually, and yet we can also know this experientially down to our bones. Sense of unmistakable oneness that is super familiar. It's like home. It's like a remembering, a sati, as
Yep.
Vervaeke describes it, utilizing
They
the
become a member
Japanese term
again. Yes.
for awakening, for remembering in a very specific kind of way.
Well, and it's,
Sense of belonging to the world again, and you feel like in relation as one with it.
Yeah.
Yes.
and we were warned of the dangers of the autodidactic approach, the self-taught approach too, because, there are dangers to doing this and just doing it willy-nilly and not having guidance. And that's why so much importance is being put on, understanding this and rebuilding new practices to achieve these higher states in a safe way that's going to maximize your grip on reality and not just have you fixated on some rabbit hole somewhere. I think last week I referenced we
need our guides
yeah.
and our shamans back.
Yeah, and
We
that's
need to somehow try and recollect that generation's old knowledge that we used to have. It was handed down for thousands, hundreds of, or even thousands of generations. Knowledge of use of specific plant medicines that we found in our environments, from hunter-gatherers up to modern days.
yeah,
Some
and
tribes are still using them, and we find that it's always a very sacramental, spiritual.
and we have institutions of information and knowledge. We've got our universities and such, but we don't have wisdom institutions anymore, like outside of maybe like good churches and other things of that nature. And so we really need to build them back. And the only way to really build them back is to get as many people engaged in this as possible. And the leaders and the teachers will naturally float to the top and start teaching, and we'll get more effective as that happens. The greater the pool of the participants, the better your teachers are going to be that come out of that pool of participants.
I like the sound of that.
It may not
Like
be
the sound of that happening.
Hey man, we can do it. We got to take our coffee shops back.
That we do.
Yes, and
engaging in wisdom fellowship.
Yeah.
Once again.
And so this change that we're having in a higher state of consciousness is a change of understanding in the participatory conforming knowing.
Yes, participatory knowing.
Yeah, and it's a reciprocal participatory knowing going back and
reciprocal
forth.
realization that occurs between you and the object or person, the world that you're interacting with.
And the quote, and you put up a short earlier about this, but love is mutually accelerating disclosure.
Yes, I love that.
Which is that's a great definition,
Yeah,
not
mutually
wishy-washy.
accelerated disclosure, realization.
And that also goes both ways.
That's that reciprocal dance occurring, where it's feedback loop that's happening.
And then we discussed the functionality of the self, which is like a gluing agent. It glues different things together.
We learned about psychedelics and wisdom tradition.
Yeah.
And that we have no respected experts on this, which you're speaking of. We have no more sanghas and satsangs. That participatory interchange alters the machinery of self, our sense of selfhood, and helps elicit transformation of character. So that radical participatory knowing is what DJ was just talking about. That beautiful, profound, world-revealing and self-revealing in a coupled fashion that occurs. So love, we learned, mutually accelerated disclosure, realization. And you brought us just up to
the next
the machinery of self. Return to the world.
And I like how this was described. It's self glues different things together, and that glue is integrating complex things together, adding complexity, but ordering them as well, integrating them. So, it's like we shouldn't strive for complete selflessness because it is useful to aggregate things together and make sense of things. Now, over identifying with the self, of course, then you're too sticky. And
that's the problem, is a misidentification. We think that we are our ideas of self,
I like that
rather than we are beings.
Yeah,
we think we have a self.
Self is a function, not necessarily like what you are. It's a function of what you do. You have a self. It's not all of you. You have a self. A self does not have you.
That's right. Yeah, and who is the you that has it?
Yeah. What is that?
What is that?
That's
through the process of self-inquiry and meditation, that becomes an ongoing, lifelong realization. There's no cap to that revelation and that enlightenment that is potential for us. We find out who we actually are, our most authentic, true expression of self, that is not attached to its ideas of itself, that is open and malleable to change, and that is our actual I. Yeah, kind of the theme of the podcast.
And I'm gonna skip through. Well, okay.
So, but we learned about why decentering is useful. So all of these methodologies, mindfulness, meditative practices, wisdom traditions, plant medicines, fasting, dancing to exhaustion, chanting, so many different methods of achieving transcendent states. They decenter us. They help us break our frame and get a new vantage point on something so that we can focus and calibrate ourselves to reality better, ever more. So that we're constantly doing this, and our brains naturally do this by losing your train of thought and mind wandering. It's actually built into the human brain to do this because it's useful for us to break our frame, introduce static and randomness, and then come back to the thing again with new eyes.
Yeah. And so
getting new perspectives and angles on it every time.
And
we're widening our awareness.
This cognitive, I guess, agency that we have can be exapted to the world from the self perspective. So all the stuff that we're doing to work on the self, we can also apply it out into the world.
Yes. So revealing the truth of who we are, we can do this in relation with reality itself, rather than thinking that we're separate from it. We realize that we are co-creative agents.
And you use the term radical decentering.
Radical decentering.
which is pretty radical now because there's like this, term that's going around. You need to decenter yourself, or you need to center these things within your perception. And it's just like, no, just let's dissolve, aggregate so you can reaggregate more efficiently. And,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
at this point in time, we really need to do it in a very profound, radical kind of way. And not
too.
radical like, waving banners and lighting things on fire,
No.
but radical as in the sense of very active and
Yeah.
very, free and disruptive. And I don't mean like bad disruptive. I mean disruptive, like disruptive strategy, disruptive.
Yes.
Like the mind wandering and stuff.
Yes, that help us reframe and see
Yeah.
things in new light.
Just on a
So the capacity for us to connect and be self-focused together can help us achieve a deep integration of ourselves in the world with its underlying patterns. And all of that machinery that's bound up in creating the sense of self can be turned to the world, like DJ was saying. So that radical sense of remembering what we are is that radical decentering, is what radically decentering ourselves allows us the opportunity to experience and remember. Yeah.
So this next part about meaning-making machines, basically neural networks. I'm just going to sum up like real quick.
The self-optimization process.
Yeah. So
This is how we get enhanced awareness of invariance.
yeah. So basically, what you do with these little neuro networks is you introduce variation through a disruptive strategy, which forces it to pick up on patterns through sampling. So it samples and samples and samples, but it suffers from
And invariance in those patterns, changes in those patterns.
Yeah. So its problem is it's too tight of a sampling, so it follows too much of the movements, and it can't make any reasoning out of that. So there's a need for something that he's calling data compression, which is basically like an average line between all the dots.
It's a self-optimization process. It picks up on the patterns of everything that we're sampling. So if you have, a chart here, we got dots, and you're trying to find the average between, instead of like mapping and trying to fit exactly to it, because that's not what happens in reality. You got to find a way to generalize.
Yeah.
And that's what our brains are doing. And that self-optimization process needs to be optimized further and further so that it's more accurate.
So that
It can be faulty. It can also cause us to fall victim to bullshit.
Yeah.
Because we tend to generalize for convenience.
Yeah, relying too much on the compression method or mechanism.
Compression algorithms that we have built in.
But so what a compression allows is the finding of the real invariance. So like
So
when you have that
underfit.
line, you can kind of see a plus or minus that, so say you have a line at a 45-degree angle, that's a compression line, and then you have all the information. The stuff that's by that line, you can reliably say is, real or makes sense. And then if you see an outlier way up top or way below, to ignore that. That's what we do.
It doesn't happen as
we
much,
ignore that. Unless you're
it's
doing
going
this
to-
and then you see, oh, those aren't actually outliers. Those are actually now repeating. Oh, and here are the outliers. So then you hit them again and you add more distortion and then more compression, more distortion. And then the what could seem like an outlier keeps sticking around through and through and through. And now that 45-degree angle line adjusts itself.
Yeah. So you just described the disruptive strategies of how we have this powerful pattern detection built into us. And this connects us to how belonging to a tradition can introduce us to disruptive strategies that help us further calibrate. Wisdom traditions, that is.
And my last note is this is what higher states of consciousness does. It is literally like, it tightly samples, then it creates a compressed average, then it introduces noise, and then it samples again, applies compression, noise, samples again. So then you find the discrete invariants that just looked like noise before, but are sticking around.
Yes. So we recognize there's something important there. So that toggling of attention that the brain does in that compression algorithm that it's playing with allows us to find the balance between the hyperactive and the hypoactive.
Yeah, which the brain, you can look at the brain when it does this, it goes from frontal and parietal activity, so frontal and parietal lobe activities when it's reasoning and gathering information, and then it shifts down, so that's the hyperactive, and then it goes hypoactive, and that's in your thalamus that then orders long-term memories.
Okay.
So it's toggling back and forth, and if you can get it to toggle real hard, then it becomes very,
Very powerful.
yes,
That's an intense
yes.
shift that can
So,
occur.
and that's what the higher
That's
states
where you
of
get these
consciousness does, is
insights.
increases the
Yes.
toggling.
So the insight of massive reframing and self-reorganization that we have capacity for is magnified greatly in higher states. We get and we've noticed measurable increases with psilocybin of metastability in the brain. So it's doing the integrating and the differentiation that it needs to do simultaneously. It's massively integrating. Normally the brain is toggling back and forth between these, but it's like the whole brain lights up and it's in concert
Yeah.
in the higher states. And so we've
like
we've
both
measured
tog-
this in the high level meditators. We've
what do you
measured
call
this
that,
in people under psilocybin, high doses of psilocybin.
Metastability, I think that, yeah. So,
Or I guess average to high. I'm not sure they're doing 3
metastability.
to 5 grams on those studies probably.
but yeah, that's the term for the term for this is metastability, which is the brain that is simultaneously integrating.
Yes, integrating and differentiating
And
at
differentiating,
once.
yep.
Yes. So our brain has this capacity for complexification, and new abilities can come from the complexifying growth process. Emergent abilities come
Yes.
forth through us, and we begin to see the world integration in a grain of sand. You see the world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wildflower. That's the differentiation. Why does this state justify a change in our life? The mission here is to legitimate the higher states furthermore for further scientific study
Yep.
and for encapsulation
Yeah,
in our lives.
So basically, why should we listen to those crazy kooks that just came back down?
Spirit and science.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like, why would we listen to the guy that's like, yo, like, I got to tell you about this experience? It was, yeah, dude. Yeah, bro, man. It's just like, I saw the universe, but then I saw myself, man. Why listen to them? Like,
Yeah,
what,
you got to be able to qualify
experience-
this. We got to be able to qualify this in some way. That is.
So, plausibility is the term that
So
we
that
use for
plausibility
this. And,
can be generated, and we can understand this
and
comprehensively and utilize it responsibly.
so the term plausibility, that the way he's using it to mean making good sense or stands to reason.
Yeah, and we're also helping heal the divorce between religion and science. This is really important. There are reasons for religions existing. They might have their cultural baggage from their times. They might do with a little bit of upgrading, and in fact, they have been over time for centuries doing just that. You notice that they change slightly over time. And people might want to argue over which is better, but right now I see an intermarrying of the many variant but complementary wisdom traditions and great spiritual systems,
Yeah.
where they are really picking up where each other leave off. They're complementing one another really well. They're helping us understand things from broader perspectives that agreed upon notions that all the great wisdom traditions celebrate, such as love thy neighbor, and the orientation of unconditionality that is preached and taught from Buddhism to Christianity, so on and so forth. So plausibility is not highly probable, but it makes good sense, stands to reason.
Yeah.
So it can be taken seriously.
Yeah.
Rather than certainty, we're relying on a plausibility spectrum, basically.
well,
we're looking at layers of
nothing is
levels
certain,
of
right?
possibility. Yeah,
So-
levels of plausibility.
Yeah.
Certainty's dangerous. You get too certain about something, you're too convinced and closed off, and you're also attached to the idea, so you can become ideologically possessed and do things that you wouldn't normally do.
Yeah. So what do we look for when we're looking to see if something is most plausible? We have the converging of multiple people have seen it or have the story about it.
So like the trustworthiness of it.
So independent but converging lines of evidence, which reduces self-deception.
Yes.
And then the
yes.
next step is the elegance and the power behind it. Can it be applied in multiple domains? Is it multi-apt?
Yeah.
So if it's, and it has to be highly fluent as well. It can't be like getting through a brick wall, like trying to get at it either.
Yeah, it
'Cause
needs
then
to
we're
be able
just
to
gonna
be
like,
deeply internalized.
Yeah.
Yes, they can come out through elegance.
yeah. And
Or
so,
be married with that elegance, that multi-app high functionality.
so we need a balance between the first two, because if you have the first one, which is the convergence without the power behind it.
Yeah, and convergence we measure by what we can see, taste, hear, smell. Yeah, verify through other people.
Yeah. So if you have convergence without the elegance. So you have something that's trivial. Oh, well, it's trivial data. We don't need to look at that. It's not compelling.
Yeah.
It's not very plausible because it's not as compelling. But if you have elegance and power without multiple sources and convergence, you get something that's far-fetched. Like the earth is flat. Okay, it's a powerful argument, but come on.
Yeah, and in the higher states of consciousness, the brain is actually evaluating its state of processing. You're actually consciously in this process of evaluating your own state of processing in a super powerful, super reflective way.
And so the last little bit on this that I got here is, if you add all of them together, you have something that's highly plausible and profound.
Yes.
And that's the profundity of the higher stage of consciousness is undeniable. We just, and we have plenty of people that have all had these experiences that can reliably point back to it. And the insights gained from these experiences, you can apply to all aspects of your life. Yeah. Like that guy at the bar we played, we were talking kind of about that, the psychedelic experience and how when you come back, the insights you gain are applicable to everything in your life, from your job to your familiar relationships to how you handle minor or major stressors and all that stuff.
It's the same insights you get from higher states of consciousness. Yeah,
and
with its own really unique, depersonalized, super meta perspective and super micro at once. Because what's happening during the psychedelic experience is that your brain is in a supercharged state of recognizing the detail and the macro at once. Yeah, looking within deeply and looking out into the world deeply.
Yeah. So basically, we come to the fact that some hypotheses and experiences are not, say, as valid or make as much sense because they're not plausible, because they don't pass this test of multiple sources. Like I don't know I'm not going to try to make an example.
The insightfulness. It's got to have the self-realizing and self-remembering. It's got to have the emergence of new abilities. Therefore, we find it profoundly plausible. And we trust science because it gives us self-correcting plausibility. It self-corrects itself. It challenges itself. We test out hypotheses to find out what's reliable, to try and disprove them. We test for alternative explanations, giving inference to ultimately find the best explanation.
Yeah. An inference to the best explanation. It's like, this is what we got. This is the best thing that we got.
That's it.
Like take the general relativity.
Best hypothesis wins. Let them battle it out.
And even how we see physics now with the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, and
what stands all of the tests the best
doesn't apply to what we look at in the largest portions of the universe.
What
but we
builds the
still
rocket
use
that
it.
is self-landing.
But like we can still use it, and it's the best for right now until we find something better, flawed that it may be.
Yeah, this is old school, but we've
right.
upgraded these a bunch.
Yeah, hey, we can write in space now, man. Like
true. Yeah.
Dude, it was only like 60 years from the time we first flied to then when we landed on the moon. That's how fast, like, when we figure out how to do something.
That's how capable we really are at co-creating together, when we really put our minds together and we have a shared mind.
That blew my mind. I was like, what? No.
Isn't that nuts? Yeah, and it's hard. It was hard. It's so hard that we haven't gone back in 50 years.
And there was a naysayer like a day or two before we first took our flight that said humans won't fly for the next million years. And then like a few days later, well, there we go. Boyos, we flew. And then 60 years later, we're on the moon.
Yeah.
It's like, man.
So plausibility is an essential part of our optimization of processing, fundamental to our sense of a reality. Higher states, then, are indispensable as they are optimal for the functioning of allowing us to get an optimal grip on reality and ourselves in relation with it. They guide us on how to grow wisdom, forward transformation within ourselves and the world.
And the scientific method that Vervaeke and others are applying to such a, say, mystical thing is very important, because we're now merging our scientific, no fanciness, no bullshit approach that got us to the moon, that gives us no wisdom. Now we're merging it with things that give us wisdom, so we can actually see what works best and what doesn't, and give the best explanation we can, so we can so we can land on the moon with wisdom.
Upgrade our
basically.
collective sense-making capacity so that we can more responsibly and wisely utilize the great technological capacity that we have. As Einstein warned us, we have the how did he put it? We have the technology of gods and the self-responsibility of kind of like adolescence, basically. We're like children with nuclear weapons.
Yeah, well, I would have to say we're probably just getting...
We're fickle, easily divided.
Yeah, we're getting past our... I'll say we are now past our teen years into our early 20 years, and it happened really quick because our teen years where we're angry at everything and we just wanted control and we wanted to be Lord of the Flies kids. Well, we dropped nukes and we starved countless millions of people, and we fought 2 great world wars that caused uncountable suffering. That was the super angsty teenage destructive stage of
Let's hope so.
the human. That's what. But we've got the young 20s to deal with, which is going to be a wild ride, dude. Yeah, we're going to think it's fun in the moment, but then once we get to
Let's hope we don't kill ourselves drunk driving the planet off.
Yeah, right.
Metaphoric cliff in space.
Yeah,
right into the sun. It's possible. Anything's possible, but we are outgrowths of this planet. We are extensions of this earth and this cosmos that have become self-aware. Literally friggin' stardust that has become self-aware of itself and its place in time and space, at least to some degree. Trying to figure out how we fit into this. How are we going to lead ourselves? How are we going to be the great stewards that we have the potential to be for this world of such bountiful and beautiful life? Yep. We have the power.
We have all the power.
Technology at hand, and we're like literally like interlinking ourselves, like reintegrating ourselves with one another. All of our cultures are merging and interrelating now at ever increasing high speeds thanks to the internet.
He mentioned in I guess it was the last episode or the summation of the episode before that, but we are basically having our own new axial age.
Yes.
Just like, the axial age in the east of the Buddha, the time of Buddha, or the axial age that happened in Greece, or the axial age that humans went through in the Paleolithic era. Like we are now at the axial age
collapse. Following the Bronze Age collapse, there was an actual revolution. We are
but we're
hopefully continuing to usher in this new...
Well, we're here right now.
Age of enlightenment.
It's shifting. It's almost we're moving around an axis, if you will, an axis of reasoning between, the old and the new, and trying to
imposing views on how we're going to go forward from here.
Yeah, and trying to sort and sift what from the old is most important for continuing into the new, but what needs to go. So what is
what's
best from the new to enhance the old,
Yeah, because we're trying to throw everything out without having even built scaffolding for any new systems yet that we can all at least agree on some level.
And on the other end,
So we have to develop our collective sense-making capacities and actually have the openness to figure these things out together. Yeah, consider each other's points of view and try to build together side by side rather than opposing each other argumentatively constantly and playing into the divide and conquer that is
one end of
happening.
One end of mindset wants to throw the baby out with the bathwater. The other mindset doesn't even want to put the baby in the bathwater to begin with. Doesn't want to change, doesn't want to do it, and this isn't a statement about like individual peoples and stuff. This is a statement about mindsets you can have, because
parasitic processing. Yeah, we're going to get into it in this episode, and we're going to get deep into it.
Hey, how about them segues?
Ooh. Oh, yeah. You like that? Oh, man. It just
that wasn't even practiced or written down or nothing.
Feel that flow
and we got
state.
to the end of our notes from last episode. Yeah, all right. We're figuring out how to do this.
All right, guys. We're going to jump in now. It's episode 13, Buddhism and Parasitic Processing with Professor John Vervaeke. Here we go.
Welcome back to Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. So last time what we did is we finished up a cognitive scientific exploration of higher states of consciousness, awakening experiences, these kinds of mystical experiences that bring about massive transformation. We saw how we can give a psychologically adequate description of these processes that explain both the experiential profile that people are having and some of the features that they find therein. We were also able to talk about this at the level of machine learning and information processing and at the brain level. And what comes out of this is a picture of a state of consciousness that in which we are getting a flow state that is improving our optimal grip on the world, optimizing our performance for making sense of things, and enhancing our overall capacity for learning and problem solving. And we saw that that, in fact, provides a very good justification for these states being the guidance for the transformation of life. In that what they do is they give a brain state that is highly optimized, processing things in a way that gives us a tremendous sense of a plausible grip on the world, and that is making use of processing that is absolutely indispensable and foundational for us. It has a kind of important priority in all of our processing. And what I suggested from this is that while it doesn't give us any good theories in the sense of propositional claims about the metaphysical structure of reality, these states do justify their claim to give us guidance. So although they are not rational in the sense of providing good argument and evidence for beliefs, they are rational in the sense of wisdom in that they optimize some of our core processing for being in contact with the reality in a way that is coupled optimally to our own processes of self-transcendence and the cultivation of wisdom. So the Buddha awakens, and that awakening gives him this state that is guiding him to a fundamental transformation in how he understands the world and how he understands, not just intellectually, because that's what I've been contrasting here, but in a participatory fashion, in an existential fashion, himself and the world. We talked about how this is bringing about a sati, a deep remembering of the being mode, so that he is seeing through the frustrating futility of modal confusion. But there is more than going on. This higher state of consciousness is not only helping him remember the being mode and helping him to transcend through systematic illusion and go through something deeply analogous to a developmental shift. We can also see it in terms, we can see what's going on in his claim to enlightenment and its relevance to the cultivation of wisdom and the enhancement of meaning in terms of the pronouncements he made from this state. Now, talking about this is very problematic because the attempts by the West to understand some of the central tenets of Buddhism has not had a very good history. I recommend to you Stephen Batchelor's book, Awakening the West, for how the West has systematically misunderstood. And Batchelor makes a current argument in a series of his books. I've got to meet Stephen at a conference, and we had dinner together. I recommend all of his works very strongly and very highly to you. And so from his works and in discussion with him, he argues that the West is still in the grip of a problematic way of trying to interpret Buddhism. So let's take a quick look at that, and then we will return to what the central claims of Buddhism are. And I want to show you why even that way of putting it is perhaps incorrect. So Batchelor, in one of his books, along with others, and he follows it up with Buddhism Without Beliefs, and then later on this is followed up by even a more radical After Buddhism, in which he's taking the position of somebody who's post-religious, very germane to many of us. But he does argue, and along with others, that we face an interpretation crisis when we're trying to understand Buddhism. We have two approaches that people give us for how we should try and interpret Buddhism. Of course, this will not be relevant just to Buddhism, but for any position that exists in a different culture or history that we're trying to understand, be it Buddhism or Stoicism or Neoplatonism, for example. So he says we are confronted with two different positions. One is the claim that you can only interpret Buddhism from within a tradition, and we've seen good reason why you might argue that this is, right, the kind of stuff we're talking about here, wisdom and self-transcendence. This is not largely a matter of altering your belief. This is about going through transformation in your perspectival and participatory knowing. It's about fundamentally altering the agent-arena relationship, your existential modes, etc. And so if you are not engaged within the transformative practice, then, of course, you do not understand what Buddhism is. It has to, in that sense, be understood from within. And this is a general property of wisdom per se. Wisdom is something that must be understood from within. The problem with that, of course, is it's myopic. Right? There are very many Buddhist traditions, and they are relative to certain times and place in particular historical contexts. And to claim that that particular interpretation, a particular sect or tradition is the sole pathway to understanding or interpreting Buddhism is, of course, myopic. It's narrow-minded and often parochial. It claims things as fundamental, which are often very contingent. So, what's the alternative? The alternative is, well, what the alternative says is, the problem with this is very subjective. I don't know if that's exactly the right word, but the idea here is, right, this is, the problem with seeing things from the inside is that tends to be very subjective, and of course that means you're not understanding the phenomena as it is, but you're only seeing it through your own particular bias. So the alternative, outside any tradition, and this is typified in the academic study of Buddhism, for example, like within religious studies, or something like that. And then the main argument here is, and this will often happen, it's not always the case, but if you meet people in religious studies and you'll say, are you studying Buddhism? And they'll say, yes, I'm studying Buddhism. And then you'll ask them, well, what practices do you engage in? And they'll say, oh, no, I don't engage in any practices. That would be a mistake. If I got too involved, too close to this material, I would lose my objectivity. I would lose my ability to critically reflect on it, critically compare it to other traditions, other approaches. So the idea here is what we will have, right, is an objective account. Now, although Stephen doesn't mention this in his book, Batchelor, Stephen Batchelor doesn't mention it in his book, this is very reminiscent of the problem that Socrates faced. Because what we have here is transformative relevance, and here we have some attempt to get at the truth. And like the Socratic project, I would put it to you, and this is what I think Batchelor is saying, is that Buddhism is about both of these. It's about trying to find transformatively relevant truths. But that means we have to transcend both of these ways of interpreting Buddhism. So he points out that we have to get beyond both of these in some fashion. How do we do this? Well, he points out that we need to do this in a way that is going to be relevant to issues of meaning in our life. So this interpretation crisis, where we have these two competing and diametrically opposed ways of trying to interpret and import Buddhism, is actually interacting with the meaning crisis in society. Because we're not doing this just in some empty cultural vacuum. We are precisely interested, as I've been suggesting throughout this series of lectures, we're doing this precisely because we're deeply involved with the project of trying to recover how we can cultivate wisdom and enhance meaning in our lives in a cultural historical context that is not supportive and is in fact often deleterious to those existentially necessary endeavors. Okay, so what do? We have to break out of all of this in some fashion. And what he does is he tries to see where these are both fixated. And what he argues is that this will become myopic because it will get fixated on the particular propositions of a tradition. It will get fixated on beliefs. And this is in fact what you study over here objectively. You study, of course, the texts and the beliefs that have been propositionally rendered by a particular tradition. It's this belief fixation that needs to be broken through. This is why he entitles the book that came after Alone with Others, Buddhism Without Beliefs, because he tries to argue that part of what is preventing us from really getting both sides of Buddhism is that both of these are fixed, locked, like being locked inside the box in the 9-dot problem, on trying to understand Buddhism as a set of beliefs. We have gotten so used to this way of thinking, and we'll see later why it is a post-Christian way of thinking, that these traditions for these axial legacy traditions for cultivating wisdom and self-transcendence are to be understood as creeds, as systems of beliefs that we now even will equate, right, the word belief with these practices. We'll talk about it as a belief system, or we'll even use the word belief as a synonym for faith, etc. So we have gotten so oriented towards this reduction of all of what we've been talking about here, all of this transformational process to the possession and the assertion of beliefs, and again we'll see historically why that's the case, that we can't break out of this. Interestingly, although I won't be able to do it in this video, we're going to see that breaking out of, right, trying to understand meaning in terms of belief systems is also going to be needed to address the meaning crisis. I have been pointing you towards that repeatedly. Belief systems, namely ideologies, are attempts to create meaning, but they fail for the deep reason, and you've already seen a lot of argument and evidence for this, is that a lot of your meaning-making machinery is not occurring at the level of your propositional knowledge, your beliefs, and your assertions of which beliefs you adhere to. So he proposes instead what we need to do is we need to look at Buddhism ultimately existentially. Now you remember existentially has to do with these modes. He also invokes in Alone with Others the distinction between the being mode and the having mode, and he proposes that Buddhism is remembering the being mode, and I've already talked about that in a previous video. And so he says, look, traditionally what the Buddha said, and now we're returning to what the Buddha said is in order to try and get more of what his enlightenment was about. Traditionally what the Buddha said is presented as the Four Noble Truths. And these are 4 statements or propositions that are usually presented to our ears as claims to be believed.
All right, we're back. We'll do a quick summation of what we just watched there, because it's already getting pretty complex. So Buddha, sati, remembering the being mode. Buddha overcame his modal confusion when he remembered the being mode, when he recognized the 2 approaches to self-transcendence were both failing. There's a middle way, essentially. And Vervaeke breaks that down really well here.
And so there's this man, Bachelor,
Stephen Batchelor.
Stephen Batchelor, and his argument was the West is in in the grips of failure to interpret Buddhism because we're trying to interpret it either.
This applies to Buddhism in any kind of tradition, Stoicism,
yes,
Christianity, whatever, you name it.
It's either as, you have to have, what practice are you doing, and there's only, one right practice, or, it becomes I have Cool Kids Club written here.
Yeah,
it becomes
very a matter of belief. You can only interpret it. You can only interpret like realization from within a tradition.
Yeah.
So it's the idea that you can't understand transcendence without being in this Cool Kids Club,
which is too subjective.
It's too subjective. It's too fundamentalist.
So
so much of it is based on belief. So
very
subjective.
The alternative to that is the overly objective and
being overly
lazy in a sense. It's like, oh no, you don't do any practices, and you don't, no, because if I was to do that, that wouldn't be Buddhism, because Buddhism is everything. And if I was to just do this only one type of thing, then I would just only be one type of thing. And how can I gain the truth? You have to have this objective look, which is way too out there, which is very similar to
it's the claim that it's the only truth. Once again, it's this overly, excessively objective way of trying to look at it without going deep into the mystical side of any tradition, without getting deep into that really deep metaphysics of any tradition. You're kind of going to be missing the golden thread that runs through all of them. You got to go deep.
And much like the
scale, even if you are choosing a couple or a few of them to do it through, but
and much like the scaling.
And that's what Buddha realized. This is like, there's got to be a middle path here. I've tried the excess of denial, and I've tried the excess of having.
This also goes. This can go back to the scaling of attention as well. So we need both of these, obviously. And I would say the first position would be the scaling down into the single thing. Okay, well, there's a single practice that you do, and you do this practice, and then the other one is scaling up and says there are no practices, they're all practices, and they both have the same pitfalls, because if you're only practicing one thing, then you choke, and you're not able to grow.
Just scaling down, just meditating without the contemplative side of that practice.
And if you're going up too much, then you get fixated on nonsense. Or vagary. Krishnamurti spoke about that. Anything that goes into being too vague, it's
that's a good point.
Don't that's not good either. But so we need the both, and we need that non-dual state. But because ultimately, what I've got written down here is Buddhism is not a set of beliefs. Buddhism is the remembering of the being mode.
Yes,
and the remembering of the being mode
allows us to keep ourselves from being too myopic, fixed on our beliefs, and literalism, and it keeps us from being too closed off to going too deep as well, and trying to get this just kind of cursory objective view of all of them and see where they kind of disagree on some high points.
And so how do we find the balance between both? And I guess the postulate or the
because we are deeply involved in this time of trying to figure out how we find meaning in our lives once again as we re-explore our wisdom traditions.
Yeah, so we find the fixations in each one of them in order to make sure not to fall into the fixation, so we can use both. Using old ways and new ways together in harmony. Using both scalings of attention at the same time.
What have we learned up to now, and what have we neglected from our deep past, and what is that golden thread that runs through everything of all of these different wisdom traditions that we find ourselves reaching for when we seek meaning
and
transformation in our lives.
Batchelor's proposition is useful also for the meaning crisis, because there's not just the one end of you have to be in a mystery school and all this or these practices to gain meaning, and then there's not just you can't just be in the other end where it's postmodern. There is no meaning. All meanings are fine. Every question is real, and what So that's the opposite end. So with the meaning crisis, we can use attention scaling.
We can use our relevance realization together Buddhism, to find out what's the most relevant things in our agent arena relationships
Yeah.
that we can optimize to.
And we figured that out by making
for the good of one and
figures
all.
and foregrounding and backgrounding and doing all the other stuff we learned in the other episodes. It's all
Yes.
coming together now.
Yes. Yeah. Isn't it cool? Yeah. You can see how he's stacking a lot of meaning into short sentences or short paragraphs now because he's taught us these terms now. Vervaeke is a great teacher. Mm-hmm. Much love to you, brother. And thank you guys for tuning in and joining us on this learning journey here with John Vervaeke and Awakening from the Meaning Crisis.
And that's all my notes on that one, unless you have anything else that you want.
No, I think I covered everything I had to.
All right, so I've got a timestamp for 1426.
Radio. Cool. Yeah, I'll give us a couple 10 seconds or so rewind here, guys. And we'll
It's funny.
back
It's
into it.
funny watching the auto transcript because like you'll see words that are bleeped out.
Now
'Cause it sounds like something you can't say.
Yeah, right.
Or it's
His enlightenment
Like,
was about.
it's
Traditionally, what the
funny.
Buddha said is presented
Here
as
we
the
go,
Four
guys.
Noble Truths. And these are 4 statements or propositions that are usually presented to our ears as claims to be believed. And that what makes you a Buddhist is if you believe them. The problem with this, of course, is that it is taking place at this very level that Batchelor argues we need to get beyond. It's not, of course, that people don't believe things within Buddhism. It's that what we've been talking about here, these processes of transformation, are taking place at the level of perspectival knowing, at the level of transforming of states of consciousness, and at the participatory level, transforming the fundamental machinery of the self, of the agent-arena relationship, and the modes of existence. So we need to understand these 4 noble truths as things that could help afford the kind of transformations we've been talking about. The point about these is not to believe them. The point about them is to get them to help you reenact the Buddha's enlightenment. If you're not doing that, if you cannot enact enlightenment, then you are not getting the 4 Noble Truths. He proposes, therefore, that we should not call them the 4 Noble Truths, we should call them the 4 Ennobling Truths. I then proposed to him in person that we shouldn't even call them truths anymore, because truth is a property of propositions. Actually, I said what you should call them is the 4 Ennobling Provocations. You're trying to provoke people into change. So let me try and go through the 4 Noble Truths, but restating them as 4 enabling, that means affording self-transcendence, provocations. By doing that, I think we can get back to, if that's the right verb, what the Buddha was conveying about what's going on in enlightenment. What kind of transformation is being brought about by the awakening experience? And what is it alleviating? Okay, so let's go through these one by one. Okay, so I'll present the standard way of representing the truth and then the reformulation in order to deal with Batchelor's, I think, astute criticism and in order to interconnect with all the argumentation we have been developing throughout this video series. So the first one is typically stated as all is suffering, or all of life is suffering. Now, that's, first of all, if that were the statement to be believed, it's false. Because suffering is a comparative term, and comparative terms can't be extended to everything. That would be like saying everything is tall. It doesn't make any sense. Things are only tall relative to other things being shorter. So, first of all, it doesn't really mean all is. It's something more like all is threatened by. Well, what's the all? Does it mean everything in existence? Should we interpret it metaphysically? Well, I mentioned last time that we should be careful about giving metaphysical interpretations to what people bring out of these awakening experiences. And the Buddha himself was famously reticent to give any metaphysical interpretations to his statements. So let's try and follow that. In order to get at that, let's note what this word means. Okay? Because again, we've tended to allow a word to go through a process of trivialization and reduction, and we've lost part of the meaning. Let me give you, first of all, an analogy. Okay, so the original meaning of this word is insane. But it has come to be synonymous with angry. I'm mad at Agnes. Doesn't mean I'm insane, right? It means that I'm angry at Agnes. How did that happen? Well, one of the ideas is anger is a state that can render you, if it becomes extreme anger can render you temporarily insane, and therefore temporarily mad. Anger is a cause, a pertinent cause of madness. Okay, so suffering, people usually hear pain, distress when they hear the word suffering. That person is suffering. But that's not actually what the word means. To suffer means to undergo. It means to lose agency. So you can actually suffer joy. You can have so much joy that you sort of have lost control of yourself. You can have so much pleasure. It is not oxymoronic to say, I'm suffering pleasure. It means I'm having so much pleasure that I've sort of lost control of the situation, right? Now, pain is a very powerful way of losing agency. Why? First of all, it's highly disruptive. And secondly, pain is associated usually with damage, and damage is a state in which we're often losing agency. So, right? Don't hear just pain. The Buddha is not saying everything's painful. That's ridiculous, because if everything was painful, nothing would be painful. Even all of your experiences can be painful. Doesn't mean anything particular, because many of your experiences can't be painful in and of themselves, right? Because again, this isn't an absolute kind of claim. Instead, pay attention to this connection rather than this one. Do you remember? Last video gave a parable of this suffering. It's the monkey that grabs the pitch and then tries to free itself, and then the other hand gets stuck in both paws and head, and then it gets killed. There's nothing in there of pain. Most of the Buddha's metaphors are not pain metaphors, they're entrapment metaphors. Being fettered, losing your freedom, losing your agency. That's why the Buddha doesn't describe enlightenment in terms of relief, but he would famously say, just like wherever you dip into the ocean, it has one taste, the taste of salt. No matter where you dip into my teaching, it has one taste, the taste of freedom. Okay? So what he seems to be saying is that all of your life is threatened with the possibility of losing your freedom. So let's go from all is suffering to a provocation. Realize that all of your life is threatened with a loss of freedom, a loss of agency. And there's a word for this kind of loss that's often translated as suffering, which is dukkha. Dukkha, again, does not mean pain. What does dukkha mean? Well, the etymology is, imagine you have a wheel, and it's off-center on its axis. So the axle is not properly going through the center of the wheel, and as the wheel is turning, it's destroying itself. There's a self-destructiveness. Or you have, your arm is out of joint, it's disjointed, like when Shakespeare has, Hamlet says, the time is out of joint, right? It's out of joint, and as you're moving your arm, it's destroying itself. So it means like an empty gap that's sort of dirty, so that as things are moving within it, they're destroying themselves. So the idea of something that's engaged in a process of self-destruction, which of course is one of the powerful ways you can lose your agency, is through self-destructive processes, is what's going on here. So realize that all of your life is threatened, very really threatened, existentially threatened, by a capacity for self-destructive behavior. Self-deceptive, self-destructive behavior. So now you see what he's doing is so situated very firmly within the axial tradition. So what does he mean here? How can we try and understand this a little bit better? So this is work based on some stuff I've published with Leo Ferraro, and then I'll talk about some additional and important new work by Mark Lewis. I want to try and trace a kind of pattern in your cognitive processing that can very often occur. And the core of the argument I want to make is the very processes that make you adaptively intelligent, and we've been talking about this from the beginning, also make you vulnerable to self-deceptive, self-destructive behavior. Okay, so let's say you encounter an event and you interpret the event as bad. Okay. Now, one of the adaptive machines you have is your brain immediately is trying to predict and anticipate other events like that. The point of, right, you encountering something potentially even painful or distressing is not just to, it's to make you sensitive in anticipating what's going to happen in the future. Okay, so your brain now tries to assess the probability of another event like this happening. Now, we'll get into this in more detail later, although we've talked a bit about it already with ideas about salience, right? Is I can't take in all of the information available to me. If I was to try and calculate the actual probability of an event, I would have to track all the variables in my environment. That's astronomically vast. Even a supercomputer cannot possibly do this. Right? So the thing is, when we do probability problems in school, we are given all the variables by stipulation. But the real world doesn't work that way. The real world has an indefinitely large set of variables interacting in an indefinitely large number of ways. So what do? Well, we use what are called heuristics. We use shortcuts that try and help us cut through and zero in on the relevant data, the relevant information. As we've said before, this zeroing in on relevant information is crucial. So one of the things we do is we use the representativeness heuristic. Right? You judge how probable an event is by how prototypical it is, how salient it is, how much it stands out in your mind. Right? And that will often interact with another heuristic, the availability heuristic. This is you judge how probable an event is by how easy you can remember a similar event occurring, or how easily you can imagine another event occurring. So these are actually very adaptive for you. Now the problem is you're in a bad state because you've just had something bad happen to you. Now that triggers a thing called encoding specificity. When you're sad, it's very difficult for you to remember events in which you're happy. It's very easy for you to remember events in which you're sad. That's because your memory doesn't just store the facts, it stores all that perspectival participatory knowing. It also stores the state you're in. This leads to very sort of paradoxical things. If you lose your keys when you're drunk, one of the things you should do, if you want to get your keys back, is get drunk again, because chances are it will improve your memory. If you're studying for a test and you have a headache and you take some aspirin, when you're actually doing the test, take the aspirin because it will improve your performance. I mean, so there's classic experiments on this. In one experiment, right, you have a bunch of people learning a set of words, right, in the same room, group A and group B, and then in the second part of the experiment, group A does it in the same room, group B does it in a different room. That's the only difference in them. Group A will remember a significant greater number of words than group B, just because they're in the same room. Okay? Now this is very adaptive. You may say, that's crazy. No, it's not, because your brain is trying to always fit you to the environment. So it doesn't just store information, it stores how you were fitted to the environment or the context. It's very adaptive. So now what's happening here? Well, you're in a bad state, so it's easy for you to remember bad things. That means it's easy for you to remember bad things, and that means you judge the probability of bad things happening to be increasing. This bad thing just happened to you, so it's very salient. That makes you judge that it's much more probable it's going to happen, and these are reinforcing each other. Now, all of this is interacting with what's called the confirmation bias. We'll go over a lot more of this later when we talk about problem solving. What this is an adaptive strategy you use where you tend to only look for information that supports your current belief. Because very often trying to find disconfirmation takes too long and it's very difficult and complex. So we tend to look for what confirms. So now, the confirmation bias, now as I'm going through my memory and my imagination, I will tend to look for things that confirm my forming judgment that this event is highly probable. Now all of this machinery can go awry, right? All of these heuristics will mislead you. It's because of this heuristic that people make mistakes when they take loved ones to the airport and things like that, right? Because we can imagine planes falling from the sky, and when it does, it's very representative for us. People describe it as a tragedy, it's in the news, and so we judged airplane crashes to be highly probable, even though they're very low in probability. But then we turn and get into our automobile, which is the North American death machine, without paying any attention to it. So we misjudge probabilities because of these heuristics. Now, we can't do without them. It's like when we talked about hyperbolic discounting. You can't do without them. They're adaptive. You need them. Let's continue this. So these are all reinforcing each other. The confirmation bias. So now what do? You judge the probability to be great. Okay? Now notice how most of this is happening automatically in a self-organizing fashion. That's again because imagine if I had to do everything fully consciously. Okay, I'm going to pick up the cup. Now I need to start tensing my upper bicep. I need to start moving my... If I had to move everything, I couldn't pick up the cup. I need my cognition to be inherently self-organizing. We've seen that throughout. The way in which your processes need to be happening simultaneously, bottom up and top down, like when you're doing reading and you're reading both the letters and the words. Your cognition needs to be self-organizing. It needs to be largely automatic. These are adaptively indispensable for you. Okay, so you judge the probability as great. Well, what effect does that judgment have on you? It's not emotionally neutral. Okay, that makes you anxious. When your brain starts to conclude that the probability of negative events is high, you get anxiety. What does anxiety do to you? Well, you lose cognitive flexibility. Your framing on things becomes very narrow, very rigid, very limited. What does that do? Well, that reduces your ability to solve problems. The ability to solve problems goes down. Okay, what does that do for you? Okay, as that goes down, you start to make lots of mistakes and fail. What does that do? Well, of course, that increases your anxiety, and that reinforces, right, that bad events are happening to you. What does all that do? Well, all of this starts to gather in your mind as, I'm doomed. You get fatalistic. Well, if you're living in a fatalistic world, you're going to start interpreting more and more events, even neutral events, as bad. And the whole thing starts to feed on itself. The very things that make you so intelligently adaptive, the fact that your cognition zeroes in on relevant information, makes it salient, the fact that it's so capable of complexifying itself and organizing itself, the fact that it is trying to fit you to the environment and process information in a way that's doable within the real world. All these things that make you so adaptive simultaneously make you vulnerable to self-deceptive, self-destructive behavior. That's what it means to say all of your life is threatened. Realize that all of your life is threatened by dukkha. It's not that everything you're doing is painful or distressing. That is ridiculous. That is a meaningless claim. It's that every process you're engaging, every time you're exercising your intelligent agency, you're making yourself vulnerable to self-deceptive, self-destructive processing. We called this, in the thing we published, parasitic processing.
Yo, we're back.
But it,
All right, so now we're going to jump into parasitic processing. Let's make sure we understand what we have learned thus far.
cool, got the timestamp for that.
Yeah, man, that was a lot of notes. Oh, my goodness.
Oh boy, yes.
Yeah, so we get into the Four Noble Truths, which Vervaeke suggests maybe better titled as like the Four Ennobling Provocations.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're talking more about that way that we can get lost by leaning too far to one or another way of looking at the world and looking at things, and such as the idea that what makes you a Buddhist or a Christian or member of this or that tradition is if you believe according to its precepts, exactly according to its its way of looking at things, its scripture, it's this and that. It's not that, and it's not being too overly objective and just generalizing about it either. So transforming the fundamental machinery of our agent-arena relationship, of our identification of self in relation with the world.
He used this word reenact opposed to believe that I liked.
That the Four Noble Truths point is to reenact the way, the Buddha's enlightenment process.
Because it's not stuck in the perspective end where it's like, well,
or even
you have to
orientation,
have this belief perspective. It's like, no, if you reenact. If you enact this again, you will know the way. That's how I perceive Christianity.
That's why Christ also said, "I am the way, the truth, and the light."
Yeah, that's how I perceive that line.
This is the way.
Yeah, and it's not like me, just follow me. And it's like, well, if you do what I do,
no, follow what I'm doing. That everyone
you will also be the way too.
Yeah, that everyone's trying to kill me for, even though it's like it's loving towards all.
Well, they don't try to kill you.
This is inherently beautiful and useful and good and life affirming. This is the way.
Yeah. Which
come with me, we will live this way.
It's not a belief; it's a very active doing. Let's do this together. It's a reenacting, if you will, or
because we're trying to evolve and we're trying to evoke change. So we're trying to understand what's going on in this enlightenment process and what is enlightenment alleviating. So we look at the standard and the reformulated definitions. Definition of the idea that all is suffering in Buddhism.
Provocation one.
A really good breakdown there. Yeah.
Yeah. So the problem with the word suffering and the reason why it's wrong is because it's comparative and it can't always be suffering.
Yeah. Comparative only works in relevance to something else.
To something else.
Yeah. All is short, all is tall, all is good, all is bad. It's got to be in relevance to something else. So that's obviously what's not meant by it. And it's also not saying that all is pain.
Yeah.
But we're thinking that because it is but we use the word suffering for in our minds we relate it to pain, because if you're in a high state of pain, you can lose agency.
Yeah. And so,
So what it's really saying is that all is threatened
yes.
by the potential that we can undergo the loss of agency. We can become fettered. We can and lost to our self-deception and our relationship to reality. So realize that all of life can be threatened by our loss of agency, our loss of sense of freedom, and so dukkha then, or dukkha, is a beautiful word for how a wheel can be off kilter. It's off center. It's turning. As it's turning, it's destroying itself because it's out of joint.
Yeah, I wrote down lopsided, off-balance self-destruction.
Yes, yeah,
Basically,
and that's basically saying how all of our lives can be threatened by our capacity to bullshit ourselves, and that is because we have these inbuilt cognitive processes that are super highly adaptive. They allow us to be able to delineate in our salience landscape what is relevant and what isn't, but it does it really fast. And a lot of it's automatic too, automatic processing. Like when we go to pick something up, we don't want to have to think about every single movement of our arm and how we're going to do the thing. It's just built in, so it becomes like an intrinsically learned process.
Yeah, because we can't interpret everything.
Yeah, so the brain's just trying to predict threat, and so it's easily vulnerable to bullshit and self-destruction and self-deception and self-destructive behaviors.
Yeah, and so,
but we're just trying to make ourselves sensitive towards what we can expect coming down the pike. So it's a good thing to have, but we can't take everything in this way. There's too many variables in reality at any one time to be able to compute all of them. And so we are trying to create salience landscapes based off of using these heuristics, these inbuilt cognitive processes, to zero in on what's going to be most relevant to be able to keep apparent in our salience landscapes of awareness of reality. And that availability heuristic that we use, how reliable does something seem, how easily can we remember it, and since we remember painful experiences and scary things and sad things more readily than things that make us happy, because this is to keep us alive, then we encode this idea within ourselves that bad things are more probable. And he gave that example of the A and B group.
Yeah,
that was really good.
Yeah, that so it has to do with, say the familiarity. There we go. Of, like this experiment is the A group. So you take an A B group, you have them learn words in separate rooms, they're learning at the same rate. Then you take the B group and put them in with the A group, and the A group does better because it's more familiar with its environment and the conditions it was under to learn the words than the B group. Like he mentioned,
which changed rooms, so it wasn't as familiar an environment. So your brain remembers everything and all kinds of different what it thinks is relevant in its salience landscape.
And the other side of that is our mitigation of the overload of information, and we do that with the representativeness heuristic, which is a
relevance heuristic, and then the availability heuristic,
which is you use the representativeness heuristic for what is most probable by how prototypical and salient it is.
That's right. Yep.
And then the other one is the accessibility here. That's right. Accessibility
availability
heuristic.
or accessibility. Yep.
Yeah.
And
so like
this interacts with her confirmation bias.
Yeah. So both, and actually both of them go back and forth. So if you're familiar with the place and something bad happened within that place, well, you're one half of confirmation bias is going to be there, and then you apply your heuristics to it, and if it fulfills those heuristics, then it goes, and then you have a confirmation. And confirmation bias isn't necessarily bad in all senses, but it saves time.
No, yeah, it's useful in some cases. It's a generalizing feature, in our brains, but it's harder. Confirmation bias it's an adaptive strategy our brain utilizes, looking for info that supports previous evidence that we've seen before, but it's harder for us to do disconfirmation when we're in this mind state, because it threatens our belief system, our sense of reality as well.
And also it continuously, like every time you go through the loop, it locks you further and further and further into the box, and everything gets tighter.
Yeah. Airplane crashes are horrific things to imagine.
Yeah, but they don't happen as
But they don't
often
happen
as
as
car
much.
wrecks.
But when you're dropping off your loved one at the airport, you're more likely to make a mistake while driving, even on the way to the airport, than they are in that plane when you drop them off. Yeah, we're in that mind state. We don't think about it that way because it's just super salient to us. And this is how we can bullshit ourselves. Some things can be more salient, more bright
particularly if it's a bad
in
event,
our consciousness.
because that has the pain, that has the anxiety tied to it.
Yeah.
And then when you're anxious, you stop thinking, you lose your cognitive flexibility.
So we misjudge because of these probability heuristics that we utilize.
And we need this.
And we do this automatically, though. It is
Yeah, we need the
cognitive
cycle to be automatic, or else, like he said with the cup, you wouldn't be able to, like, if your body
you couldn't
wasn't
drive
automatic.
if you were terrified of accidents with every single car that you were going by or being near. I mean, you're going to be using too much of your processing power just worrying about what could happen and focusing on the actual road.
So I got a little, let's call it a poem, because it's not a sentence, but this is how I summed it up. Mistakes were made and I failed. Anxiety happens, spiraling. Doom.
What is
it?
Reinforcement loop.
Fatalism.
Yes. Leading
It's
ultimately.
more spiraling.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's what happens. Yeah, so the cognition needs to be self-organizing. Thus, we are also prone to bullshit and self-deceiving ourselves sometimes and giving too much credence to some of that confirmation bias that can occur in the brain. So we have to be constantly checking and in this in and out process to calibrate our awareness and get really practiced at that. Calibration is the process of wisdom. So anxiety. So if we go into an anxious state of mind because we're in confirmation bias and we're worried about, say, the loved one that's about to get on the plane, we lose our cognitive flexibility. We thus lose our problem-solving capacity, and then we start making mistakes potentially.
and then our bias
And
keeps
then
getting
the failure.
informed by the failure as opposed to
failure
what is
increases
real.
anxiety. We lose further cognitive flexibility. We become more fatalistic.
Well,
just
and
becomes a
that's
reinforcement loop.
that's the dukkha. So
That's dukkha. That's the wheel off kilter.
yeah, so
That's it.
all of your life is threatened by dukkha.
Yes.
Is basically
Self-deception. That we are vulnerable to self-deception, our adaptive machinery. So we must learn to hone it and become aware of our confirmation biases and how they can serve us in generalizing, like when we're on the road driving.
Yeah. And it's important to be aware of the natural
instance.
cycles that your brain's going to do already. So then if you have to, you can say, like,
We're going to favor what we want to believe in.
yeah. And so, like,
So it's good to remember that, so we're willing to challenge and try and disconfirm even our own beliefs, because we're trying to get closer to
Well,
what is
think
good for
about
one and
this
all,
too.
not
So,
to personally be right
like, if you're trying to,
or seem right,
if you're trying to, like, get somebody to, become familiar with dogs again, but say maybe when they were a kid, they were, like, attacked by a dog or something happened with a dog in a place. What you would do, you wouldn't immediately bring the dog out. You'd probably bring them to a place that was similar to, like, what had happened. So this is breaking down.
Nice, yeah.
This is breaking down the encoded man, I'm having a hard time speaking.
Specificity?
Yes, thank you. My
That was
dyslexia
hard
showing.
for me just now, man.
So, and not just the facts of what
Exposure
happened,
therapy you're
but
talking
yeah.
about,
So you would expose them to it, and then eventually,
Very gradually,
and then
incrementally,
you would encourage their
and maybe show them a video of a dog in that environment.
Well,
after they've gotten used to that
I would say if it
environment.
happened at, like, a dog park or something
There
like
you
that,
go.
you bring them to a dog park and not have any dogs
Without
around.
any dogs around at the time, and
Yeah.
then you introduce one really friendly dog. Or
Yeah.
you just show a
Well,
video of a really
and-
friendly dog, and then say, "Would you like to
Well,
maybe meet
before
this dog?"
before you even get to that, you would then have them use their heuristics, the representative and the accessibility.
so
there
really-
are no dogs here. There, like,
yes,
so.
yes.
And then
That's what's happening in the brain.
And then now you're creating a positive confirmation bias.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, I can do that. And you do this with people who, like, are a little bit agoraphobic too. You don't immediately send them out to the club. You start them with, like, a quiet cafe.
Yeah.
And, so you re-expose and then you go through the loop again. And now
Yeah.
they're a little closer to the dogs. And then you have a special, specific, nice tempered, whatever dog for them to interact with. And it just keeps cycling. So since we know our brain does this, we can retrofit solutions to it, and we can do it in the moment when we're getting lumpy, if you will, when we're when the wheel is getting a little floppy, and be aware and be like, okay, I'm going into there. I'm going into this loop. I got to stop. I got to reverse, and I got to reset the confirmation bias, because you're always going to have some type of confirmation bias. The goal is to get past it, but like, you know, you got to realize, you know, it's like, well, I should be afraid of that dog. Dogs will bite you, man. They just got big teeth. It's like, okay. No, they are kind of cute. Not all dogs bite people, and some dogs bite people, but they can't do nothing because they ain't got no teeth. You know, and, you know, so you gotta re-break yourself, and it's
reframe.
It's nice going through this too, because this isn't just like an intellectual endeavor that we're doing here. This is useful stuff that can be applied. And
man, this whole sequence was like, it's particularly heavy.
Yeah, and I'm not an intellectual either, so
it's
going through this whole thing
as I hear it. Like, I'm like, okay, I want to live up to this, but I can tell, like, God, I got a lot of the self-deception within my own person, within my own life, my attachments, my own addictions. And I do see that is decreasing my capacity for higher levels of agency and freedom in this world.
Yeah.
That's a powerful insight.
Yeah.
It's leveling, but it's also like, it might kind of knock the wind out of you, but it's also building you up at the same time.
And this is extremely useful. So like when I say I'm not an intellectual, I do like intellectual endeavors, but I'm more of like a practicalist.
There you go.
Is it practically applicable? Because if it's not, I have a really hard time maybe finding value in why I should store it into my long-term
and that's, and in the last episode he said, you know, a lot of this stuff, like these ancient wisdom schools, they're like mired in how do you say it, mesmerizing mysticism almost,
sure, yeah,
you know,
we'll
and
show
it's
you
like
pretty
we need to
shapes
get past,
you know, pretty
the
shapes
mesmerizing mysticism of the different cultural motifs and stylings and all of that are utilized to teach from the different times and places that these beautiful ancient traditions come from, to find that non-dualistic glue that holds them all together. Yeah, that deep insight that we see congruent throughout all of these various traditions.
I think we're on the edge of this as far as the species go, throughout. But I think it's a revolution of self and our relationship with the world and the universe.
Yeah. What an exciting time to be alive, man. Like, we're really seeing the gems of wisdom of all of these ancient traditions that are time-tested over millennia, that are ingenious and deeply profound and life-affirming, that are coming into congruence with one another. And they're building together now. This is all of humanity. All of our global cultures have reached this point in our technological advancement. Now we have the opportunity to continue the upgrade of our human advancement of our inner, how do you say it? Just of our humanity, you know, our capacity to be humane, to be stewards.
Well, I think that word
to be courageous.
Yeah, I think that word
and kind.
Humane and humanity is going to shift in meaning, and I would like to be part of the people that shifted into the good meaning of what we think of as humane and stewardship.
Yeah, and without guilt tripping ourselves and gaslighting people to get our way of thinking across and blaming each other for all of this. You know, I went through a phase when I was younger and coming into a lot of realization about corruption within our own government, and I was really upset with people prior to the war in Iraq, because right after 9/11, literally like 85% of the people in this country supported going after Iraq, even though it had nothing to do with 9/11. But Bush and the media did such a good job of constantly transposing Iraq and then the war on terror, and then talking about Iraq and weapons mass destruction, and then we're engaged in this war on terror because these people attacked us, and they kept trading Saddam and Saddam Hussein and bin Laden back and forth at the same time too. Sometimes George Bush Jr. would actually slip and be like, and then bin Laden bombed our towers. And I'm like, man, how much of this is accidental and how much of this is opportunistic and on purpose? Because we know that.
And wasn't it Saudis that were actually the ones flying the planes into the buildings?
Yeah, so after CBS and NBC and Fox News and CNN all together, like in congregation and alignment, actually sold us this idea of our country being attacked and gave us PTSD the day that the towers fell, showing those planes hidden at every commercial break. Man, they had that shit so dressed up too, because it was like suspenseful music, you know, the planes flying, and you got the sound effects, planes coming in, explosions, and with that suspenseful music, and then the graphics of like a target on the United States, you know, target reticule on a map of the United States, and like flashing alarm lights and friggin' just like excess everything, terror in every single speech all the time to sell a multi-billion-dollar surveillance state that actually,
dude, if you were in a school,
is a violation of many of our
when I was in school,
intrinsic liberties that we founded in this country.
So on our, back before we had like private computers and all that stuff, they would have like one screen up in the corner, and that would play like the morning school news and all that stuff. But then, so we saw the Twin Towers hit because my first period teacher was like, "Nah, we're keeping this on because you got to see it with your own eyes. It is traumatic, but like you got to know what's going on." And then we got nothing but
the way that they showed that.
We got like Al Jazeera and other propaganda in school on the TV.
Al Jazeera was pretty good back in the day. BBC used to be pretty good.
Yeah, but it drummed up a lot of like fear after it, and they were showing this. They were showing this to children, and they were doing the propaganda at school, not just on the TV at home, because they were showing us stuff from TV.
And don't get me wrong, like
I'm not knocking Al Jazeera or nothing, but
like doing what they did in this country is despicable and horrifying, and it shouldn't be done by our own country to other countries either.
No,
but that's often been the case.
But you
as our country's been used by corporate interests for wars of resource acquisition, right? And this is a Democrat and Republican problem. And both Bernie Sanders and Trump called this out. The military-industrial complex in our country, Dwight Eisenhower called this out, and it's happened. And it's crazy how we went from that 85% public support of the war in Iraq and like 75+% approval of George Bush and Congress at that time to a complete flip.
Well, you can
Congress
only be the lumpy wheel so long,
and Bush approval dropped to lowest, like super low levels, like historic low levels, like 15 and 30% global ratings, and
well, you can only
support for the war just dropped dramatically. But it took like 7 years or so.
You can only be
for that to happen, and so that's the power of how bullshit can be utilized.
Yeah, but
and something can be made super salient, and we can be easily manipulated, and you know, the powers that be.
And you can't be the lumpy wheel forever. Eventually, it's either going to break, or you're going to get tired of it and you're going to change the wheel. And that's what happened. We got numb to it. It was just all the time. And then we started getting mad, and then we changed it, and we were like, screw you. Like well, they did the same thing with the COOF as well. The death counter on every, like CNN and MSNBC. And it was this how many people are dying, updated every, live update and all that stuff. It was the same stuff, man. And it's just like, yeah, bad things happen, but I have very little human love for people who will use fear and terror to push whatever it is. Not
the
saying,
killer bees are coming again.
Yeah, death hornets.
There's a new kind of
what was that, like the
cold virus?
What is it? No opportunity. What's the saying about don't let any opportunity or any tragedy get unused or something like that, or every tragedy is an opportunity.
Yeah, if it bleeds, it leads, man, and every tragedy is an opportunity.
Well, and you know what? Instead of
mainstream media conglomerates are concerned,
instead of complaining, and I'm not saying you're complaining, but in general, for me, instead of complaining about the people doing this, I think it's more important to arm and armor people against this with this kind of meaning making. So when you see it, you can defend against it, and then you can cut through the bullshit. Quite literally.
Yeah, we can actually build up our firewalls for the bullshit.
Yeah,
and we can improve our sense-making capacities so that we know how to make sense of what is, and how easily we can fool ourselves, and how we do this. And it's natural. It's okay. We got to stop being so angry at ourselves and one another, and get out of our heads.
Awesome.
We're so egocentric. We're so afraid of being wrong. Like, who cares if we're just trying to figure out what's good and true for one and all? We'll be fine just confirming our own hypotheses all day. Challenge your own beliefs, question everything. We're trying to find out what is true, and if you are happening to be supporting something that is true and good for one and all, knowing the counter arguments to it is just going to help you defend it better. So whatever you believe, look at the counter arguments and try and look at independent perspectives.
A good way to do this is you yourself try to debunk your own beliefs as hard as you can, and then once you can't do it anymore, go find somebody else to do it for you. So then have a conversation with them.
Then find the best books on that subject, challenging it and everything you can. If you really want to get engaged in this game on that level. But generally, we can improve our firewalls and our collective sense-making capacity and our collective wisdom-making potential to arm ourselves against the the downsides, the dangers of these
Well, we
cognitive
need
processes that we do have.
cognitive herd immunity. We need
It's-
enough people to get these skills together, and then so we.
We need to realize our wisdom traditions and upgrade them. And like you were saying earlier, coffee shops, getting together in congregation again, and wisdom fellowship and spiritual fellowship, regardless of tradition. I mean, the non-dual way of being, the recognition that there is only one thing, everything is interrelated and interconnected, as the yin-yang symbol shows us. Everything is interrelating opposites. Then you can find that through all these different major wisdom traditions. We can celebrate these ideals together.
Yeah. So I just said cognitive herd immunity. I don't know if anybody else coined that term, but if they haven't, I'm coining it, and I think it's important because what herd immunity is.
I like it.
Herd immunity
Cognitive
isn't
herd
like
immunity.
you have so many people that have been infected with something. It's the infection goes to either one or less people. So you have one person that gets it and they pass it on to one or less people. That's herd immunity. Ideally, it'd be down like 0.2 people. So it's very rare to happen. So instead of an infection, it's bullshit and lies and
Bullshit detection.
like so it's the
Collective
bullshit only
bullshit
gets
detection.
the bullshit only gets spread from one or less people. And that's cognitive herd immunity, where you have at least enough people that are aware and finding the bullshit that it's not able to spread around efficiently enough through the population to cause a crisis, a sickness, of a mass contagion, if you will, of the mind and the cognitive processes. And I don't really like using infectious language and stuff, but I think it is apt for how lack of meaning can leave us susceptible to mass psychosis events.
Absolutely.
And more than that, just or less than that, like just bad fads, if you will. Not to be confused with Gad Sad. He's a pretty cool dude, but bad
He's a cool dude.
fads.
I like that set.
But yeah, so cognitive herd immunity.
Cognitive herd immunity,
I want-
baby.
Now I'm gonna find somebody else who was talking about this 10 years ago or something, and I'm like, damn it. They're always going into the future and then back in time to steal my ideas. All right, do you want to take a quick break?
Every great idea has been capitulated and recapitulated with a little bit more definition to it.
It's been exapted. Every great idea has been exapted into new great ideas.
And great ideas need multiple perspectives on them. So, having multiple ways of saying something that's deep and fundamental to life. I mean, that's like the object of great poetry and great music and great art.
Well, that's the plausibility. The first part of plausibility is the divergent converging sources. And then the next one is it applicable to a lot of things? And that's its power.
Applicable? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is it multi-apt? I really like that word.
Yeah, I do too. That's cool. That's a really cool term.
So,
Yeah,
I would like to take a break. I got to pee.
Quick break. Let's do it, guys. Go ahead and pop yourself some corn, get yourself a drink, and we're going to be back in probably 5 or 10 minutes. So stay tuned. We're going to finish off the last just like 20, 25 minutes of this episode. And yeah, see you guys momentarily. Welcome back, everybody.
Hey. All right.
Cognitive herd immunity.
Yeah, I like that one. I'm going to have to think on that concept a little bit more. Maybe make it catch on,
How we may develop. You could create a flashpoint presentation on
Okay,
it.
yeah, I'll call it cognitive herd immunity in a post-COVID world.
There you go.
Yeah,
That's
there you
great,
go.
dude.
Zinga,
That's good.
yeah.
Put it down here. In a post-COVID world.
But less about the infection, if you will, and more about
In a post-panic mode, right?
Yeah, like what we went through collectively as a species and are still going through in some places more than others.
Yeah.
Which,
No doubt.
yeah, but things to think about, and things that are going to piss people off. I like pissing people off.
Indeed, it's true.
I'm not necessarily an a-hole, but if I have to be, I will be.
Well, we gotta be willing to have the complex and difficult conversations.
Yeah, and do it with a smile on our face.
Well, we can invite people into a new orientation of figuring things out together approach. And that's how if we approach with that kind of orientation, like in our minds, we're side by side with the person trying to figure it out. We'll find ourselves framing our arguments that way or our statements that way. It becomes more of a interdialogue, than a competition.
Yeah.
Where it's like you're opposing each other, debating, trying to prove.
Well, that that interdialogue is one of the only games that we play that everybody wins if you do it right and everybody loses if you don't.
We can get so attached to our belief systems that we can do crimes against one another that we would never think of doing individually. But that groupthink gets you, man. Mob mentality. And our belief systems can indeed ideologically possess us to the point that we will close ourselves off to actually good information.
Even
that
even if it is the
upgrade
most
our-
blatantly obvious information too. You've closed down so much that even something that should be salient and true is nope, that's not salient. I can't see it through.
It's hard for people, I know, because we all have so much going on in our lives. We're all busier than we've ever been trying to make ends meet. That, the greedy that run amok are further enabled to do so and to further divide and conquer.
And they're enabled to do so by our laziness and our
Profit from,
reticence to suffer the weight that it takes to, I don't want to say,
well, they
do the
manipulate
work,
us too.
but
Yeah.
to do your own work.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And
know.
we are indeed up against multi-billion-dollar psychological.
Oh, and they had a lot of money for
Operation
research on
schemes.
how to manipulate you
Yes, they
very
do.
well.
Yes.
But that research is out there, and you can look at it yourself. And
We can also arm ourselves
yeah,
with wisdom.
and we can use it on each other in a non-malicious way too. Say we try to advertise the Actuali podcast, so I tell my friends when we're talking about stuff like this, I'm like, check it out, and you can use sales techniques to make things super salient, but make it true instead of bullshit.
Zig Ziglar style, man,
Yeah.
where it's like a win-win situation for everybody. Yeah, that's the best way, man. We've got to find ways to make this subject matter attractive for us again as humans, because we've been turned away from it for so long because it's become so big. The challenges that face us have become so great that they are at once very much stunting us. They're stopping us in our tracks. They're putting us into fear mentality, and we're just trying to keep up our having needs of survival. And like I said, making ends meet. We don't even feel like we have the time to deal with these larger world issues that our species has now experienced, such as a breakdown of meaning and understanding and making sense together. We used to be able to, we had traditions that, while imperfect, they did allow us to actually recognize transcendent ideals that we could live by together that superseded our interpersonal affairs even.
And we delighted in it.
Even the king and the leaders must be bound by these universal laws of goodness and loving thy neighbor. And once these ideas were introduced, such as by Christianity, the idea that the lower classes matter as much as the nobles, and that even the murderer, even the rapist, even how is it that, okay, so Christianity looks out for the dispossessed, it looks out for the young and the innocent, and it looks out for those elders whose mates have died and need people to care for them. The people that have been dispossessed, that need caring for, deserve as much love as the nobles, and even a murderer deserves love. Is a crazy concept.
Was not Jesus also hung on the cross next to a despicable person?
So we got the idea of innocent until proven guilty, because we can get in our heads that someone was a murderer when they weren't sometimes. Yeah. And so thank God for genetic testing and things like that nowadays, but this still happens. People on death row die every year that are actually innocent. Yeah. So trying to put measures in place to protect ourselves from our cognitive biases and our confirmation biases.
Well, how many,
like burning the witches and all of that stuff.
Well, how many stories do we have of, I don't know, somebody in a family gets accidentally killed by somebody else, and then there becomes this feud of then the other family kills somebody of the other family or burns down their house, and then so then it's family back and forth. Well, the Hatfields and McCoys, it started that whole thing. If you're not familiar with the Hatfields and McCoys, it was two West Virginia families that had a blood feud. Yeah. So think like the Montagues and the Capulets from Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, right? But it was all started over a pig, somebody stealing somebody's pig, and then get messed up. and then one of the family members, fought, maybe killed another one, and then another, back and forth and 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 back and forth.
Yeah. And so everybody deserves a chance to make up for their sins and to be a good person. Jesus is willing to give anybody that chance.
Well, I think
he also said that we should treat everybody as equals, that we should treat everybody with love, even our own enemies.
Yeah, instead of getting emotionally riled up to the point where you can no longer make any sense or meaning, and then just responding purely emotionally, like the Family Feud stuff. That is to be avoided. And
because our confirmation bias is real. We will paint demons where there aren't sometimes, and we will also.
There's
looking out for ourselves. We will let the lower classes be taken advantage of by the ultra wealthy.
I mean, I got a cell phone.
Because we're just trying to survive.
Do you have anybody? You got an electric car?
Yeah. But the sleeping giant, at any time, we the people can come to wake and create new systems that make the existing failing ones obsolete. Not to say that that America's system is awful. It's actually great in many respects. It's a beautiful ideal. It's the first time human beings ever came up with something that allowed us to try and devise a system of self-governance rather than being ruled by nobles and elites and bloodlines and tyrants and despots. Now, while imperfect, we do deserve a 2.0 version of this. Like these ideals of freedom of speech and a free, fair marketplace for all to be able to transact in and trade in. With protections and the right kinds of regulations that are reasonable, that help still encourage business but protect us from our self-destructive tendencies and all of that.
There's a deep freedom.
It's hard. It's a hard game to figure out, but we can figure it out together. We have to, right? Yeah, go ahead there. Sorry, go ahead.
But as far as this country and what makes it great is we respect the most primary deep freedom to protect oneself, and that's included your mind, but physically protect yourself. It's the prime rule of nature to protect yourself. And
if your government becomes corrupt,
so the Second Amendment isn't just about owning weaponry. So you can't limit it to only muskets and all this stuff. It's about the fundamental protection of self. And I think that the Second Amendment, not just arms, shooty, but also access to information that you can use to protect yourself. So the First and the Second Amendments are just a continuation, are continuations.
Really,
of the same
like Dave Chappelle said, like
thing.
The Second Amendment is there just in case the First doesn't work. But the First is the most fundamental. We've got to be able to have the ability to speak completely openly with one another so that we can dispel the foolish belief systems that are out there and argue against them openly in public, in the town square, so everyone can see why they're wrong, and less people are going to become deceived by them.
Well, because then you can point out the bullshit, and enough people see it and say, okay, instead of letting it fester, and then you get rabbit holes and little secret groups of people that do their whatever it may be that they want to do.
Conversation is the last bulwark we have before war begins.
Yeah.
And if we can't figure it out through conversation, then it turns violence, and then the innocent get involved, and
well, the one
it's
thing
no good for anybody.
Is we're allowed to protect ourselves, not just physically, but mentally. Well, for now in this country, that is amazing because there were points and times where you weren't allowed to defend yourself. Like if another I don't know, group of people came and like pillaged your village and stuff like that, you didn't have the means to protect yourself or anything else. That was somebody else. That was your lords that were supposed to protect you by gaining their armies and stuff like that. And then before that, it was always somebody else protecting you, or you had
to hope your lord was a good guy.
Well, even the one gripe I have is in some cities, and I will not name them, but in some cities in the United States, like if somebody tries to like mug you or hurt you or kill you and you beat the crap out of them, you get in trouble. You get in more trouble than the person that tried to do it to you. That is ridiculous. That is absolutely ridiculous.
Where you're supposed to leave your house if it's broken into.
Yeah, it's like, no.
Rather than defend
Well,
it.
the same thing goes with the mind as well. We're expected to shut up and just say the words. It's like, no, we're not. We are allowed to defend ourselves with words. If we're being attacked with words, then we're going to defend with words and logic. That's why I think there's,
Well, it's more than just defend. It's like engage. You're supposed to try and engage in sense making with that person that you're arguing
But that's
against.
where it's like also the defense, like, we're also guaranteed a defense. Like if we're accused of a crime, we're guaranteed a defense. And in the meantime, until we're actually found to be guilty, we are presumed innocent. So we can defend from an innocent perspective opposed to a you're guilty perspective.
Right.
And we've kind of flipped that on the head now when it comes to discussing ideas. It's like, no, you're guilty of wrongthink, instead of like, okay, make your argument, make your point, and let's do it in good faith. Now it's like, no, like you just said this thing that I don't like, so now all of your points, no, you're guilty of whatever ist I can put on you, or obe, or any of this other stuff. And
yeah,
it's
that
like,
othering's got to stop, man.
and it's not just an American phenomenon. It's hitting the whole globe. I'm not going to get all conspiracy theory, but you can read official stuff, and this is the plan.
It's age old. It's
Yeah,
age old that
yeah.
divide and conquer is highly
Sure.
profitable. And we also
Yeah.
know that corporations have indeed been enthroned, and they've been in a challenge against this system of self-governance and others around the world for the last
Well,
couple
we're the-
hundred years
we're
since the
the-
founding of this country.
We're the last
was happening.
bulwark against complete totalitarian takeover.
Aristocracy is always going to be a challenge.
Yeah.
Oligarchy is always going to be a challenge
And it
because
has been since
humans
the beginning
can
of time,
be greedy
you know.
because they can get stuck in that having mode,
Yeah, sure.
and they become
And the most manipulative.
increasingly perverse, it seems, because they're not meeting their being mode needs. They're not finding inner peace. So once they get all the money that they need, now they start
Just
playing
want
this
more
power
control,
game, and then they
yeah.
get into some really dark Epstein didn't kill himself kinds of activity.
Hashtag MC didn't kill himself. Yeah.
Man. So these are hard things for us to face as a species, but we all know deep down what's going on. We also all sense the social breakdown that's happening among.
Regardless of like what
Within our,
beliefs you
individual
have, you can
nations.
sense it's
You
breaking
can
down.
feel it happening, and
We all
we need to
all
be the
feel
glue.
it.
We need to
Yeah.
bring this thing back together. We need to get involved in figuring things out together again, and so we have to find ways to popularize wisdom, collective sense-making capacities, so that we can even be interested in orienting ourselves to do the work together. But these are hard things to sell, and
Yeah, because it's not like, take this pill and in 7 days you'll lose 7 pounds of fat. It's not one of those kinds of things. It's more
but
like,
it's also the most life-affirming
Yes,
project that we can
yeah.
be involved in. If you're looking for meaning, if you're looking for belonging, this is the game. This is the point in time that we're at as a species.
Yeah.
We are the adults now, and we get to decide which direction spaceship Earth goes from here.
yeah, do you want to go Lord of the Flies, or do you want to do something more like
This
Star
is a
Trek?
crazy
you know?
fulcrum point in a species evolution. This is a really exciting time to be alive. It's almost
It's not boring. I
it
can
seems
tell
like
you
it's
that.
very likely that when species get to this point of technological capacity, that they reach a fulcrum point, a pivotal stage, like a phase shift, as Daniel Schmachtenberger describes it, wherein you're like almost in this cocoon stage where you have the potential to metamorph into higher levels of relation and just blast off and be able to fly around your environment and change from, because butterflies become super pollinators after being super decimators of their environments. They eat up almost every leaf in their local area before they go into the cocoon, and then they turn into a butterfly and they become super pollinators. Now, if you looked at the human race right now, you could think that we're completely destroying everything, and we could think of human beings as like a cancer to this planet. But then we can also remember that we're actually outgrowths of this planet. We're extensions of this planet.
And we're the
that
only
become
species.
self-reflective.
We're the only species that has a shot of stopping a major big
Yes,
asteroid from
that
smacking
too,
us.
right? We really
come
are.
on
We're
now.
save the humans, man, because
Yeah.
we're the only things capable of stopping that next asteroid. If you really care about life on Earth, recognize that we are extensions of Earth. We are not separate from her, and we have this great capacity that we get to wield, and we just have to learn how to maturely and responsibly wield it together.
And let's
if
not-
we don't, then that
It was a good run, bud.
It was a
Yeah,
good
it was
run.
fun.
It was a good run, but we might as well at least try. It's certainly deeply fulfilling and engaging to be a part of, and to recognize that this is where we're at. It's quite exciting, and it's beautiful. I mean, just to see that we've come so far as to be these animals that write poetry and sing, and try
care-
and make each other laugh
And care
with
so much
comedy.
for cute things, yet eat cute things as well. Strange creatures. But the one, so
say happy holidays and Merry Christmas to strangers when we're walking by, and it's like other animals don't do this stuff, man. Like, we've come a long way. We still have a lot to deal with, but we've come a long way.
but we're also prone to parasitic processing.
Yes, we are.
Segue.
Yes, we are indeed.
Yeah, which all the last stuff that we talked about, or he was talking about with the cycling, that was the negative aspect of that is the parasitic processing.
Mm-hmm.
So what did I say outside? Like, make it a symbiote and not necessarily a blood-sucking parasite. That's,
Yes.
Use the
Yes.
tool, don't be used by the tool.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I like that.
Symbiote.
All right, guys, we're going to jump back in now. to episode 13 of John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis.
It's not that everything you're doing is painful or distressing. That is ridiculous. That is a meaningless claim. It's that every process you're engaging, every time you're exercising your intelligent agency, you're making yourself vulnerable to self-deceptive, self-destructive processing. We called this, in the thing we published, parasitic processing. It's not just about bad events. This is just one example. We get into all kinds of these spirals. We'll put up on the video a recent schema for what depression looks like that was released by some MIT researchers. Very complex like this. We call this parasitic processing because it's like a parasite in that it takes up life within you and it takes life away from you. It causes you to lose your agency. It causes you to suffer. And here's what's important. This capacity for your cognitive brain to be self-organizing, heuristic using, right? Complexifying to create complex systems and functions with emergent abilities has a downside to it. Look, this is what you know when you're in one of these spirals. You'll know it. Oh no, here I go. Oh no. Knowing it, what does it do for you? What does your belief do? It's like knowing that I should go outside the square. Think outside the box. Doesn't do anything. Why? This is a complex, self-organizing, adaptive system. If you try and intervene here, the rest of the system reorganizes itself around your attempted intervention. It can adapt and preserve itself as you try to destroy it. Why? Because it's making use of the very machinery by which you adapt and make use of the things that are trying to destroy you. That's how it works. No matter where I am, this is a perennial threat. No matter what I am doing, this is always liable to happen. Now what's interesting, as I said, my colleague and good friend Mark Lewis, we're talking about comparing this to other work that he's recently been doing. So some of you may know Mark Lewis. I highly recommend you take a look at his work. Mark has been deeply influential in my own thinking, ideas about dynamical processing, self-organizing systems development. He is one of the foremost important neuroscientists about addiction and how addiction works in the world. I strongly recommend reading his book, Memoirs of an Addicted Brain. So Mark was himself, I'm not disclosing anything confidential because it's right in the book, Mark was himself an addict in his youth, and then he overcame his addiction, then he went into neuroscience to try and figure out what is addiction, how does it work. Now that's important because addiction is primarily the loss of agency. Right? Addiction is distressing and painful, but when we're talking about somebody being addicted, the way we finally diagnose them is by how dysfunctional they become, how much they lose their agency. Right? So you are a video game addict if you are playing video games to the point where you cannot pursue the goals you want to pursue in your life. You cannot establish and cultivate the relations you want to establish in your life. You cannot cultivate the kind of character or identity you aspire to. If the video gaming is robbing you of those agentic processes, then of course that is what we mean by addiction. Addiction is a loss of agency. Now, when you take a look at Mark's work, Mark Lewis, he challenges, right? I just saw him give a talk. I've been having lunch with him, but I also saw him have just a really good talk at the Society for Psychology and Philosophy, or Philosophy and Psychology. We'll get the order right. Just this past year. And he was not the only person making this point, but he articulated it with his own particular explanation, which is his. So the point that many of people are making is the standard model of addiction is incorrect, fundamentally wrong. What's the standard model? The standard model is we have a biophysical chemical dependency, and when the chemical is removed, we get an overwhelming compulsion to have to seek out the chemical. And if we don't get the chemical, then we suffer, similar to as if we were starving from a lack of food. And so that's what addiction is. And the problem with this is it sounds very commonsensical, and the media likes it. It has the one unfortunate feature of being almost completely false. Because first of all, you can get addicted to processes that have no biochemical basis, like gambling, for example. Secondly, if the overwhelming compulsion model was correct, you have a great deal of difficulty explaining some very, very pertinent facts. Most people spontaneously give up their addiction in their 30s. We, of course, get focused on the people who remain addicted, and therefore we come to believe that addiction is an overwhelming compulsion. But if you actually track people, many people spontaneously stop being addicted. Here's a great historical example. You have soldiers in Vietnam during the Vietnam War getting addicted to opioids in Vietnam. The opioid crisis! Not that it isn't a crisis, but we tend to think that certain chemicals are intrinsically addictive. So, they get addicted to heroin. When they return to the United States, the vast majority of them spontaneously stop using the drug. But why? Chemical, not in the body. What's going on? Isn't there a biochemical lack and therefore a huge compulsion? Well, think about it. Think about it in terms of existential learning. See, when they were in Vietnam, they had a particular identity. They're a soldier. And they're in a particular arena, war. They're in a particular existential mode. When they return to the United States, they become a citizen, right, in a peaceful country. The relationship between the agent and the arena is what is fundamentally being altered in addiction. So Mark proposes a model that he calls reciprocal narrowing. So here's your agent, and here's the arena. And what happens is the drug use is associated with a particular agent-arena relationship. And what happens is, and we talked about this before, remember this is always co-identification. We're always assuming an identity and assigning identity in a co-defining, interdependent manner. What happens is you start to lose a little bit of your cognitive flexibility, perhaps due to something like this. As you lose your cognitive flexibility, the number of options in the world starts to decline, right? As the number of options start to decline, you lose the variability for your agency. As you get a tighter, narrower, less flexible cognitive agency, the number of options in the world goes down. And what happens is these two things reciprocally narrow to where you have no options as to who you could be or how the world can be. And that's addiction. It is a learned, not propositionally learned, perspectively, participatory learning of a loss of agency. I pointed out to Mark that if this is the case, there must be an opposite. If there's a spiral down, there must be a spiral up. And in personal communication, just recently, he said, yes, totally. And you know what that spiraling up would be. What would be the agent-arena relationship in which the agency and the world are expanding? That's anagoge. That's the move towards enlightenment. What I want you to understand is dukkha is these two things because they're interpenetrating. This loss of agency, because this is your agency. As you're simultaneously doing parasitic processing within, you're doing reciprocal narrowing without. Those are totally reinforcing each other. That's dukkha. And no matter where you turn, this is always threatening. You can't get free of it. You can't run away from it. You can't deny it. Remember, the Buddha tried self-denial. This is like trying to hop over your shadow. You can't do it because it is endemic. All of this is endemic. This is the agent-arena relationship. You can't do away with this. This is indispensable to you being a person. This is self-organizing, relevance realizing, complexifying, processing. You can't get away from that because that is what makes you adaptive. So what do? That's what the Buddha meant when you realize that all of your life is threatened by dukkha. He didn't mean believe that all of life is suffering. So, what we need is, how do we address this? Well, once you realize it as a provocation, the point is, you should feel threatened. You should feel threatened, because if I can make you feel threatened by what I've just done here, how close and intimate this threat is to you, then you're starting to enact the process of moving towards enlightenment, rather than just asserting some propositions that are largely inert. So, what's the standard way of presenting the second truth? Suffering is caused by desire. And that gets you into all kinds of problems. Because then, don't I desire enlightenment, but then you should not desire to, and then you can just get into all these weird loops, and right? A better way of thinking about it is realize that dukkha can be understood. Realize that dukkha is caused by the way in which you can become attached, which doesn't mean, right, that you just really like something. It means this sense of a narrowing of yourself and the world so that agency and options are lost. The way the addict is attached to their drug, which is not a compulsive desire, although they will experience it that way, it is better understood as a parasitic processing that has led to a reciprocal narrowing so that no alternatives are available to you. The third, the traditional presentation is the cessation of suffering is attainable. But realize, a better way of putting that is realize that you can recover your agency. Because this narrowing down can also, you can use the same machinery to anagogically ascend out of the cave towards the sun of enlightenment. Realize that this machinery, this complex machinery, this dynamical system can be exapted in a way that reduces your capacity for self-deception. Why? How? How do I address this? By a psychotechnology. The Buddha offered a psychotechnology of practices. Do you know how you deal with a complex dynamical system that is operating against you? By cultivating a counteractive dynamical system that is operating for you. You cultivate a dynamical system that doesn't intervene just here or here, one at a time, like your efforts. I'll try this. Oh, that doesn't work. I'll try this. Because every time I intervene, it just reconfigures, and I'm doing the same damn thing again. Here I am in this fourth relationship, doing the same damn thing again. And I know I'm doing it, and yet when I try and not do it, I find myself doing it. That will not work. That's why people end up in therapy. But what if I could create a dynamical system that could intervene here, 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 simultaneously and in a coordinated fashion? What if I created a counteractive dynamical system? And that didn't operate just at the level of my beliefs, but operated at the level of my states of consciousness and my traits of character. That's what the Buddha offered. He offered the Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Path is a counteractive dynamical system that counteracts parasitic processing and does reciprocal opening beyond the ego self and beyond the everyday world. That's why it's represented by an 8-spoked wheel. It's supposed to be a self-organizing system that rolls itself, in which each part is interdependent on all the other parts. You might have heard it. The Eightfold Path is to cultivate right understanding, right thinking. There's various translations of this, right? Sometimes right aspiration, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, and then right mindfulness and right concentration. We already talked about this. Saying there's right mindfulness and right concentration means there's incorrect. One thing, this right is not moral righteousness. This is right like right-handedness. It means getting an optimal grip. Because that's what my right hand is an expert in doing. It means getting an optimal grip. Notice this is about your cognition. This, right, is about your character. And this is about your consciousness. And it deals with ethical aspects, existential aspects, sapiential aspects. It is the attempt to give you a counteractive dynamical system that can deal with parasitic processing and that can help you reverse the reciprocal narrowing until you get anagogic awakening that takes you beyond the prison of the ego and the everyday world. So we see what's happening here. What I'm trying to show you is this higher state of consciousness, this awakening, is set into a context of helping you do important transformations. It helps you to remember the being mode to get out of modal confusion. It helps you counteract parasitical processing and reciprocal narrowing. It helps thereby to open you up to self-transcendence in a reliable and powerful way. This is what the Buddha was offering people. And I've tried to explain it to you in a way such that both you should feel threatened by what he is trying to provoke in you, and you should be encouraged. Both of these are enactment statements. You should be able to enact the threat and enact the courage, encouragement, enacting the courage, that you can respond to the parasitic processing and the reciprocal narrowing in your own life, to the modal confusion in your own life. Part of what we need to understand is how we can properly integrate this into what we have been learning about wisdom and meaning in the Mediterranean cultural historical context, and how all of that can be integrated within a current scientific worldview. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Meow, 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 meow. Meow. Ruff, ruff, ruff. Meow. Ruff, ruff, ruff.
Meow,
Meow. Ruff, 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 ruff.
meow.
Meow.
Oink.
Oink. Ah, no, we're not ready for this one yet. Ah. What's up, guys? We're back.
Yeah, it was good. That was real good.
If you couldn't tell from the meowing.
I didn't get the chance to actually watch this one beforehand, so this was all new to
cool.
me right up front, and it was
It's a hard-hitting
kind of
episode,
nice.
man.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, there for a bit. I'm like, oh, I hope you caught that.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right.
this is when I realized I was like, oh my gosh, okay, I'm gonna have to restart from the beginning when I
Yeah.
first discovered this series a few years back, and
Yeah.
man, but upon hearing it, I knew this thing's gonna spread and it's gonna go places, and
So
I'm
the
excited to help encourage that process.
The first thing I have written is the monster is adaptive. This parasitic processing monster, even though you try to intervene at any given point, it will work itself around you.
Yes, the ego will recapitulate itself,
Yeah.
as the Buddhist practitioner knows.
Yes.
Yes, it takes up life within us, and so we're losing processing power to this parasitic processing. Basically, that's the sense of suffering that dukkha is the word term dukkha is pointing to. So we have this self-organizing heuristic using brain. It's great at complexifying, but it has a downside. This perennial threat of the parasitic of our processing. And so Mark Lewis, who wrote on dynamical processing in Memoirs of an Addicted Brain, that sounds like a really good book, tells us how addiction is a loss of agency. And we can become addicted to things that are biochemical as well as just like screens. We're all addicted to our screens and our smartphones nowadays. And, behavioral mannerisms.
I would say habits would be like you get addicted to biting your nails.
Mm-hmm. There you go.
And what's
our belief systems.
Yeah, and he gave the example of the soldiers coming back or being addicted to
soldiers in war,
heroin, and when they came back, they lost it, and this brought he enlightened me to the term of reciprocal narrowing.
There's a rat study that relates this idea really well too, where these rats were basically given water that was laced with cocaine, and they'd get addicted to it, and then they would take it away from them, and they would put half the group into just the same kind of cage, but now the water has no cocaine, and then they'd put these other rats into like a rat heaven cage. It's like King's Dominion or Disney World for rats. It's got all kinds of rides and toys and games and treats. The water has no cocaine, but the environment is much better. And so the rats that are reintroduced into the same environment without all the accoutrements, just the same as before, but minus cocaine, are friggin' miserable. But the ones in rat heaven are friggin' fine. They're just doing fine. And so we know it's deeper than a chemical dependency. And we do have that with some drugs, that there is severe chemical withdrawals when you get very severely addicted, like heroin, and alcohol is the main one that you can even die from.
Yeah, it'll kill you if you're too far into it.
But very much of it, I mean, even with opiates, it's so much about that agent-arena relationship. So the identity that the soldier has when he's in the war arena, that identity turns into the identity of a citizen in a peaceful country. He can give up because he's in a much more comfortable environment now. It's a lot easier for him to give up that thing that he was using to help him deal with the loss of meaning, the senselessness of everything around him.
Sure.
Yeah, and so agent arena is a codifying and interdependent relationship we have at all times with our sense of reality.
And within this arena, we have. So when we're reciprocally narrowing, our loss of the agent and the cognitive flexibility creates less options within our arena, that then creates less agency, then creates less cognitive flexibility. And so his summation was the addiction is learned, and then if that's the spiral down, what's the spiral up? And that's the anagage is the spiraling
go.
up, the spiraling out. So instead
Yes,
of
yes.
you're
The
opening
move
your
towards
cognitive
enlightenment.
flexibility and you're
Yes.
gaining more options. and you're
Recognition of
gaining
dukkha at play.
agency.
Yes,
You know,
gains agency.
Yeah.
So yeah, we recognize dukkha is always at play. There's always potential existential threats. This is endemic to reality. So we learn again, not too tight, not too loose,
yeah.
in association to reality. How intimate this challenge that Buddha offers feels, or that Plato would offer to people, or that Vervaeke is offering to us now, is like it's indicative of our being in a cultivation process now of enlightenment, of realization. We're recognizing that the wheel is off kilter now, and realizing that dukkha can be understood allows us to see how we can become psychologically attached to our beliefs and ideas and objects and addictions, habits, how we can narrow that sense of options, like you said, how we can be constrained by that parasitic processing, that reciprocal narrowing.
And like he said, you should feel threatened because that feeling starts your movement towards enlightenment.
Yes,
Like you should
yes.
feel threatened
Yes.
from dukkha. Be like, this is a threat. I need to do
but
something
you can also
about this.
see that there's an encouragement here. There's an instilling of courage and the opportunity to enact courage. I love that he says, realize you can recover your agency. That sounds very religious kind of a message, doesn't it?
Yeah, and so
Sounds like something Christ would say.
when he said
You can ascend.
Yeah, when he said realize that dukkha is caused by the ways you can become attached, that whole releasing yourself of your attachment instead of being a superficial thing like, oh, give up your family and your pleasures and all this stuff. It's like, no, like learn what your attachments are, because that's what's putting you in this lopsided wheel, self-destructive.
Yes.
Or not even what your attachments are, but what you can become attached to.
Yes, and that we can transcend this psychological tendency through psychotechnologies such as the practices of that help us develop wisdom, meditation, contemplation, so on and so forth.
Yeah, and these psychotechnologies are that Buddha have come up with. So this Eightfold Path is a dynamical system.
Yes, it's a counteractive dynamical system.
Yeah, that intervenes in all parts of
Yes.
your parasitic processing all at once. So
this is why Buddha gave us the Eightfold Path, so that we had a way to, because there is reciprocal narrowing thing that can happen in us through the parasitic processing, downside of our cognitive capacities, we can also have a reciprocal opening, an interdependent system of understanding and realization that can approach these challenges from all angles at once. So we need to get right understanding, and not like righteously intended as this word right.
Well, right as in right hand.
Getting the correct optimal grip.
I think I brought this up in our early one of our early episodes, but
right understanding, cognitive flexibility.
But about the
right
word
thinking, aspiration.
the word right, real quick before we get into the rest of them, because I want to make sure this is understood as best as it can. There's a history of the right hand being the dexterous hand that comes to grasp with everything, and we call this so when you get your eyes checked, you'll see DO on your prescription, and that's OD, ocular dexter, or oculus dexter, so the right eye. And then the other hand is the sinister hand. So we're literally referring to what's right, what can do things, and what's sinister. And, so right and left do have very deep meaning. And in this sense, it's right, like literally the right hand that comes to grasp that, so you need the right hand, the right hand of understanding in reasoning, the right hand of understanding and thinking, of speech, of action, like a proper grasping, not the left hand, which is the floofy.
Yeah, if you're right-handed,
nonsense.
this is how this would be expressed.
Yeah,
to
but
you.
it's the history.
And that's why, because most people are right-handed, we tend to use
Yeah.
right with right.
Yeah,
The
and
word
also
has
with the
dual
way the
meanings.
brain works, the left side of the brain, which controls the right side of the body, tends to deal with the knowns and coming to grasp with the knowns, whereas the left
but what
side
is the
of your
optimal
brain,
hand for you is the point.
Yeah.
It's basically about getting an optimal grip on reality.
Yes,
what is the best way to
precisely.
approach
That's why the
this
word
thing?
right is there, not
Not with
what
the sense
is
of
right or
righteousness
wrong,
as right or wrong, but just what is
most
going to
best
be most
grasped
optimal.
Because what is
It's
most
not ethical. That this term of right that we're using, but there is an ethical, existential, sapiential aspect to this enlightenment process.
So we have right
So
understanding.
right understanding is not meant as righteous, but
Yeah.
right thinking and aspiration, that's getting you a little bit closer to getting into that sense of virtue.
Yeah,
And then right speech, right action, right livelihood, right living, right mindfulness, and right concentration.
So how do we concentrate, be mindful, have a livelihood, action, speech, thinking, understanding that all move us towards anagage? This understanding grip. That's what it means by right. It's like so I guess in the Eightfold Path, if you read through it, there won't necessarily say prescriptive, but maybe prescriptive, like,
Sure,
you
yeah.
should do this. Well, these are practices.
things to cultivate.
Yeah, these are the
things that can
psychotechnologies
help
Buddha
you.
has come up in order to help.
Yeah, reverse the reciprocal narrative
Yeah.
and get the anagogic awakening going.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is why higher states of consciousness are so helpful for us. They help us awaken and transform, counteract the narrowing, open to self-transcendence, to the capacity to continually reframe and widen our perspective.
Well, when said like that, it gives one more incentive to go ahead and look at it and see, opposed to just like, well, do you want to be enlightened? Yeah, you do this for enlightenment.
It's
It's like,
not just
no,
about
it's like,
widening the perspective either. It's about creating a more reliable salience landscape with that widening.
and this
as
is
well.
a better description of what enlightening is, opposed to just this, oh, I want to get enlightened. I want to get woke, man. Like,
Right.
it's like, yeah, well, I want to continue to awaken and come to better grasps with myself and with the universe that I'm in.
Yeah, Buddha's way is like an invitation, basically. It's an invitation to engage with that inner and outer meeting crisis. Recognize our reciprocal relation with ourselves in the world.
And it's in the name too, like as far as inviting, it's a path. What do you do with the path?
Yeah, it's
you
a
walk
way.
down it.
It's a way. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's the middle way. That's why. It's not too tight. It's not too loose.
Yep.
Very cleverly stated, though. I mean, to understand that, with that, to understand it the way Vervaeke describes now, just adds so much to it. And it's no wonder that we can so easily misinterpret what Buddha or Christ or any other great wisdom teacher was trying to tell us. These are very deeply complex subjects, and our confirmation bias is constantly veering us away sometimes from this fuller understanding of reality and how we can be in relationship with it.
Yeah, and it can blind us to like quick changes and immediate changes and things too, because you could be right for a period of time, but then things change. And
Yes.
if you're not willing to
Yes.
continuously change with it, then the confirmation bias, instead of being something that's accurate and helpful with the way that things are, can now become destructive.
Yes.
And
that's why Buddha told us, don't believe anything just because the authorities say it is true, the great teachers say it is true, your parents say it is true, the religious say it's true, because it's popular and widely believed.
Or
Don't
even
believe
if it's
anything
expected of you. Just,
until you have looked into it for yourself and found it to be true and good for one and all. And so that requires our own careful research and investigation into ourselves and into the wider world.
Oh man, this next episode should be pretty good if it's continuing on with this.
Yeah. It gets more and more powerful as it goes. It's remarkable.
I'm gonna have to get another.
How Vervaeke's brought so much wisdom together. He really is standing on the shoulders and interacting with giants, and some beautiful, inspiring people out there working along with him.
Well, hopefully, I hope at some point in time, maybe, definitely not like, fame-wise, but intellectually and my understanding grow as big as the giants, so I don't have to stand on their shoulders anymore.
Well, we can interact with them, guys. Like, you can join, and I need to actually, I'm not
But
like
even just like personally
a
myself,
big Discord user, but I want to use Discord more so that I can engage with the people in the John Vervaeke
But-
community.
like ultimately, I'd like to have an understanding and a reasoning of all this stuff in a way that puts me, instead of having to stand on the shoulders of giants to see the way, I can be the giant myself and see the way for myself.
Oh, sure. Yeah, well, we
And,
want to...
know-
well, we're always going to be standing on the shoulders of giants just because we inherited language. We inherited
So we need to
these
become new
psychotechnologies.
giants. We need to become the new
You know,
giants.
I mean,
so-
we're standing with Buddha and Aristotle and Jesus and so many people and artists and wise sages that have helped us get to where we are today. And it's just a term for saying that we have a
Well-
lot to be thankful for that was built before us,
Sure.
that we've now inherited, that we get to
And
build further from.
I think we have the ability to become those giants ourselves, and maybe that was the
Certainly
purpose
do. We all have that
along.
capacity to
Instead of just
do
like,
what Mario did. You can become Super Mario.
Yeah,
It's true. You
yeah.
can ask the questions.
yes,
And definitely while you're smashing those question blocks, make sure you smash the like and subscribe button on this video. Share it with friends and family out there who you think may be interested as well. This is it's been very helpful for me personally, and overcoming the cognitive biases and habitualness within my own self. And this episode hit particularly hard because I can see how much work there is left to do, but I'm thankful that I have you, my brother, to share this with and to do this work with. And all of you guys out there, we love you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Was there anything else we wanted to say before we go?
No, not really. Just stand strong. Don't hide for too long. Get out there, do stuff. Be afraid to ruffle some feathers, and then don't be afraid to have your own feathers ruffled. We can't be quiet and complacent anymore. And I think the best place we can put our energies is into making meaning in the world, opposed to just fighting against what we think is the worst.
Yeah.
Because we can't do better unless
what we
know
resist
better.
persists, man.
Yeah.
What we resist persists. It just grows stronger.
Yeah.
The more we resist it. Yeah, brother. Oh, yeah. That pin that you're holding there, that was given to us by a photographer. Speaking of going out and doing stuff and interacting with people, we just had a show with our band American Dharma up at R&K Pub in Hagerstown, Maryland, for New Year's Eve, and we were with Light Upon Darkness and help me. Demise. Not Demise, no. Disfigure.
Sorry.
We played with Demise too. Disfigure. Yeah, my brain. But I'm trying to think of her name.
All right, so
this is a photographer we met out there. If you're looking for a good photographer.
Is Wicked Photography by Tess.
Yes, Tess.
Facebook.com//Wicked Photography. Oh, no, it's Jess. By Jess.
Sorry, Jess.
Well, the scrolly J looks like a T. Or Wicked Photography by Jess at gmail.com. I'm not going to send the number out, but you can go to those. The pen's really nice. It has one of those little butts on it where you can use your cell phone. She was very nice. And as far as photographers go, even though she had to kind of like get close to you and do other things, and she's very unobtrusive. So if you're a band person,
yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing those shots.
Yeah, if you're like in a band or whatever and you want somebody to come to shoot the show and do that, perhaps she could be your person to shoot the show. So yeah. So one
weddings, whatever you got, man. I'm sure she does a lot.
Yeah.
I think she does mostly band work right now.
Okay.
But yeah. And I'm trying to see when our next show is. It's in February. Get up on our Facebook for American Dharma, and you'll be able to see it there under our events. Because I can't remember the day. I think it's February 3rd or February 6th.
Yeah, I don't even know. They tell me the week before, and I show up. Perfect drummer.
I normally remember these dates. What it is. There it is. Yes. Okay. Is it February 11th? I think that's the one. Hedgesville, Virginia, at 7 Moons. I believe that's it. I do believe.
Hedgesville, Virginia?
West Virginia, sorry.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
I was like, oh no, that's going to get confusing. So Hedgesville, West Virginia, 7 Moons.
Yes. Yeah, it's going to be the next store building that she's got over there at Unit 6. Yep, it's going to be us this February 11th, starting at 5 p.m. Cannon Hill, American Dharma, and Rattle Root. All awesome bands. I'm really looking forward to seeing Rattle Root. We haven't gotten to jam with those guys yet.
Sweet.
So that's going to be a lot of fun. And that's a really cool little wellness shop that you guys should definitely check out in Hedgesville if you're looking for some cool knickknacks, meditative and spiritual paraphernalia, and all kinds of cool jewelry, necklaces,
crystals,
decorations for your home, and incense, and everything. And there's also room to rent space next door if you want to put on your yoga with people or whatever it is. Yes. So yeah, thank you guys so much for tuning in. And we love you all, and we will see you next time, Wednesday, 8 p.m. Join us.